Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Supreme Harry. In today's episode, we explore, what if Sorting Hat refused to sort Harry until scan complete and discovered 48 behavioral binding charms from age 2, hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Hat refuses. The candles in the Great Hall were floating exactly where they always floated, casting the same amber light they cast every year, and the enchanted ceiling above was doing its September thing, deep violet, scattered with the first sharp stars of autumn. Everything was as it should have been. That was about to change. Harry Potter stood in the line of first years filing through the enormous double doors, and he was trying very hard not to gape at everything. He mostly failed. The ceiling got him first, then the tables, 4 of them, long and gleaming, packed with students in black robes who were craning their necks to stare at the new arrivals. Candles everywhere. The smell of food that hadn't appeared yet. The sheer size of it all. "It's bewitched," Hermione Granger said from behind him, in a tone that suggested she was reciting from something she'd already read. "The ceiling, I mean. It's meant to reflect the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Said the red-haired boy in front of Harry, which was apparently all he had to offer on the subject of ceilings. Harry didn't say anything. He was looking at the teacher's table at the front of the hall, specifically at the man in the center of it, ancient and silver-haired, with half-moon spectacles perched on a nose that had clearly been broken at least once and a beard that seemed to be in direct competition with the length of his robes. The man was watching the line of first years with an expression of benign interest, and Harry had an odd feeling, like something pressing against the inside of his skull, when the man's gaze moved to him. He looked away. The teacher who'd led them in, Professor McGonagall, severe and Scottish and wearing a pointed hat that somehow managed to look practical, set a 3-legged stool down at the front of the room and placed a patched, ancient, battered hat on top of it. The hat was the ugliest thing Harry had seen since Dudley's old Halloween costumes. Then the brim opened, and it started singing. Harry listened to the song the way he listened to most things, carefully, filing pieces of it away without quite knowing why. The hat described the 4 houses. It described what it looked for. It sang about wisdom and cunning and bravery and loyalty in the way old things sometimes did, like it had sung this particular song so many times that the words had worn grooves into the air. Then it finished. The hall applauded. McGonagall unrolled a scroll. "When I call your name," she said, "you will come forward, sit on the stool, place the hat on your head, and be sorted into your house." Names started getting called. Abbott, Hannah, Hufflepuff. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. Harry watched each student sit down, watched the hat consider them, watched it shout the house name like it had just remembered something important. He wasn't particularly nervous. He wasn't sure what he was. There was a faint pressure behind his eyes that had been there since he'd stepped into Diagon Alley and hadn't quite gone away, and he kept noticing it the way you notice a sound you can't quite place. Granger, Hermione. The girl from behind him walked up with her chin slightly elevated, sat down, and had the hat on her head for barely 4 seconds before it shouted, Gryffindor, with an enthusiasm that seemed slightly above the baseline. She looked pleased in the specific way of someone who had known exactly what was going to happen and was gratified to be right. More names. Longbottom, Neville fell off the stool on his way up and then got sorted into Gryffindor looking like he wasn't entirely sure he deserved it. Malfoy, Draco sat down and the hat touched his head and said, Slytherin, so quickly it was almost rude. Ron Weasley, called as Weasley, Ronald, became a Gryffindor in about 30 seconds. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the polite quiet of before, a different quiet, electric and held breath, spreading out from some students to others like a ripple. Harry heard people whispering his name, heard it pass along the Gryffindor table, the Hufflepuff table, everywhere. He walked to the stool, sat down, and put the hat on his head. It slipped down over his eyes, going dark, and then something that wasn't quite a voice said, very quietly, "Oh." Harry waited. The hat didn't say anything else. He sat there. The hall, which had been whispering, slowly went quieter again. Someone coughed. At the teacher's table, Professor McGonagall checked her scroll and then looked up at the stool with a slight frown. "Hello?" Harry thought, not sure of the protocol. The hat didn't respond. Or rather, it made a sound. If a sound could be made inside someone's head, that wasn't words. More like the noise of something very old and very thorough suddenly finding a problem it hadn't anticipated. A rustling, reordering sort of noise. Like a very intelligent creature going still. 30 seconds. The whispers were back, louder now. "Something's wrong." The hat's voice came back, and it wasn't addressing the crowd, it was talking to Harry, low and urgent. "Hold very still. Don't move." "I'm not moving," Harry thought. "Not physically." "Don't, there are things here I need to see properly, and every time I look at a section of your mind I find another layer in the way. Something has been done to you. Multiple somethings. I need to," but whatever the hat needed was apparently more complicated than expected, because it went quiet again. A whole minute passed. The great hall, which had initially been whispering, had now gone into an odd collective silence, not the comfortable kind. The kind that happens when 200 people simultaneously realize something unexpected is occurring and none of them are sure whether to look at each other or keep looking at the stool. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore had set down his goblet. His expression hadn't changed in any dramatic way. It was still pleasant, still open. But his hands, which had been loosely folded on the table, were now very carefully flat against the tablecloth. McGonagall took 3 steps forward. "Hat, quiet," the Sorting Hat said. It had never, in living memory, told a professor to be quiet. The sound that rippled through the hall was half gasp, half inappropriate laughter immediately suppressed. McGonagall stopped. Harry sat very still on the stool. The hat's voice was back, lower than before, working through something. 47, no. No, there's another one underneath that one. That makes 48. 48 behavioral binding charms, cast at intervals beginning when you were approximately 2 years of age. The oldest ones are so deep I nearly missed them. They are layered, each one anchored to the one below it, interlocking, done by someone who understood charm architecture at a professional level. Possibly more than one caster. A pause. "You have been, I don't have a kind way to say this, you have been comprehensively managed, Harry Potter. Since before you could form most memories." Harry processed this. What does that mean? He thought. Managed how? It means that who you are sitting here right now, your instincts, your feelings, your capabilities, your memory, is not what it should be. I cannot determine what house to place you in because I cannot reliably determine who you are. Not behind all of this. The hat's voice was doing something strange, it sounded, Harry thought, almost angry. Which was odd for a hat. I will not sort you. Not like this. Not into any house, not on this basis. What has been done to you is, I have been performing sortings for 1,000 years and I have never once seen anything like this. Oh, Harry thought, which was essentially the same reaction the hat had started with. I'm going to speak to the room now, the hat said. You may want to hold on. I, said the Sorting Hat, loudly, in a voice that carried to every corner of the great hall and probably several corners beyond it, refused to sort this student. The silence afterward was the loudest Harry had ever experienced. This student cannot be sorted in good conscience, the hat continued, because this student cannot be properly assessed. There are 48 behavioral binding charms on his magical core, cast since the age of 2, suppressing, distorting, and redirecting fundamental aspects of his personality and magical ability. Until these are diagnosed and addressed, any sorting I perform would be not only inaccurate but actively harmful. I therefore decline. The hat went quiet. The great hall did not. The noise hit like a wave, all 4 tables erupting simultaneously, and Harry just sat there on the stool in the middle of it all with the hat still on his head. He couldn't see anything with the brim over his eyes. He could hear everything. Heard the scrape of a chair at the teacher's table, more than one. Heard McGonagall's voice saying something sharp that got lost in the general chaos. Heard a Slytherin somewhere near the front saying, 48, in a tone of pure disbelief. Heard Hermione Granger, in the Gryffindor section, saying, "Oh, that explains the charm density I noticed at King's Cross," to apparently no one in particular. And over all of it, he heard Dumbledore. Not loudly, but the headmaster had some quality of voice that could cut through noise without raising it. "Minerva," he said. Just her name. But it meant something. McGonagall's footsteps came toward him quickly. Her hands, careful and professional, lifted the hat from his head and the hall came back into full view, 200 students staring at him, every one of them, and Harry had a split second to decide what his face was going to do. He looked out at all of them and didn't feel afraid. He wasn't sure what he felt. Curious, maybe. Like something had just been said that answered a question he hadn't known he'd been asking. McGonagall crouched slightly so she was level with him, and her expression was the most complicated thing he'd seen on a teacher's face. She looked like she was angry and concerned and trying very hard to be professional about both. "Come with me," she said quietly. Harry got up from the stool. As he did, his eyes went to the teacher's table. Dumbledore was watching him, that same pleasant expression, but Harry caught something behind it. Something that wasn't pleasant at all. Something that looked very much like calculation. He filed that away, the way he filed things away, and followed McGonagall out of the Great Hall. The doors closed behind them, and the noise of 200 students didn't muffle so much as it transformed, walls turning it into a distant roar, the sound of a very big story starting to be told in a room he'd just left. McGonagall led him through corridors at a pace that required Harry to jog slightly. She didn't speak. Her jaw was set in a way that made her look like she was physically holding something in, and her heels hit the stone floor with a precision that suggested she was redirecting a significant amount of energy into walking. "Professor," Harry said. "In a moment, Mr. Potter. I just wanted to say I'm not panicking or anything. In case that's a concern." She glanced at him sideways. Something in her expression shifted, not quite softening, more like she'd filed a note about him that she hadn't been expecting to file. "We're going to the hospital wing," she said. "Madame Pomfrey will perform a proper diagnostic. Can you tell me?" She stopped. Reconsidered. "How long have you had the pressure behind your eyes?" Harry blinked. "Since Diagon Alley." "How did you know?" She didn't answer immediately. They turned a corner, climbed a staircase. "The Sorting Hat's announcement," she said finally, "was unprecedented. In my 40 years at this school, I have never heard it refuse a sorting. I have also never heard it speak in public about a student's assessment. It keeps its readings entirely confidential." A pause. For it to break protocol to that degree means it judged the situation to be serious enough to override convention. It seemed pretty alarmed, Harry agreed. "Yes." Her voice was clipped. It was. The hospital wing was white-curtained and smelled of potions and clean linen, and Madame Pomfrey was already there, which Harry found slightly odd until he realized that news traveled faster through a school full of magical portraits than it traveled any other way. She was a small, efficient woman who took one look at Harry and immediately directed him to sit on the nearest bed. "Arms out," she said. "Don't move." She drew her wand and began casting something, a diagnostic charm, he assumed, watching the faint golden light settle around him. Within about 10 seconds it turned from gold to a vivid, uneasy orange. Madame Pomfrey made a sound. It was a very small sound. But in the quiet of the hospital wing it landed like something much larger. "What?" said McGonagall, behind her. "I'm running a full scan." Pomfrey's wand was moving faster now, precise and methodical. "The preliminary is already showing, I need the full scroll." "Give me the full scroll." A roll of parchment appeared from a cabinet, seemingly on its own, and began to unspool. And then it kept unspooling. The diagnostic findings came not in quick bursts but in a steady, relentless scroll, line after line of text appearing in careful script, each one another detected charm, another buried working, another layer. The scroll kept going. McGonagall read over Pomfrey's shoulder as it printed, and Harry watched the professor's color change the way weather changes, gradually, then all at once. She went from her usual composed paleness to something that was almost gray. The scroll reached the floor. It kept printing. 48, Pomfrey said, when it finally stopped. Her voice was professionally flat, which made it worse. 48 individual binding charms of the behavioral classification. The oldest are 9 years old, so yes, as the hat indicated, they begin around age 2. The newest, she ran her finger up the scroll, looking. The newest was applied approximately 14 months ago. She looked at Harry. Someone was adding to this as recently as last summer. The room was quiet enough that Harry could hear the candles. Can you remove them? McGonagall asked. Remove them, yes. Safely, in the right order, without causing harm, Pomfrey sat down in her chair, which was not a thing Harry had seen her do once in the 5 minutes he'd known her. That depends entirely on how they're anchored. Some binding charms, if removed out of sequence from a stack this dense, can cause, she gestured. Magical feedback. Personality fragmentation. Memory rupture. I would need someone who understands the architecture of this specific layering. Someone who knows what kind of caster did this. McGonagall was still reading the scroll, which had been laid out along the floor because there was nowhere else to put all of it. There are signatures here, she said, very quietly. Embedded in the older workings. Yes, said Pomfrey. I saw. The way they said it, the way neither of them completed the sentence, told Harry something. He didn't know what specifically, not yet. But the shape of it was clear enough. They recognized something. And recognizing it had made both of them very careful about what they said out loud. Harry looked at the scroll spread across the floor. He couldn't read the diagnostic shorthand, but he could count. He counted approximately 48 distinct entries in the list before the scroll curved under the bed. What do they actually do? He asked. The charms. What do they change? Pomfrey looked at him with the expression of someone assessing whether a patient could handle information. Whatever she saw in his face must have answered the question, because she said, without softening it, they suppress. Each one targets a specific, the clinical term is, behavioral vector. So one might suppress a particular emotional response. Another might redirect an instinctual magical reaction. Another might create a mental block around a specific category of memory. She pointed at the scroll. This one, for example, charm 19 in the sequence, appears to target what the diagnostic calls dominant social confidence. Meaning the charm is specifically suppressing your natural inclination toward authority. Your instinct to challenge it. Harry thought about that. About 10 years of not challenging anything. About making himself small in the cupboard under the stairs because somehow making himself small had always felt like the obvious thing to do. And without it? He asked. Pomfrey almost smiled. Without it, you're presumably someone who challenges authority quite naturally. I can live with that, Harry said. The door opened. Dumbledore came in, alone, which Harry noticed, because he'd half expected McGonagall to have sent for him and half expected him to bring half the staff. He came in quietly and closed the door behind him, and for a moment he just looked at Harry. My dear boy, he said. Harry looked back at him. Headmaster. Dumbledore's gaze moved to the scroll on the floor, and he was quiet for a long moment. May I? He asked Pomfrey, gesturing toward it. Pomfrey handed him the near end of it. He read. The pleasant expression held, professionally, precisely, but both his hands were on the scroll now and Harry watched his knuckles, which were white at the joints. Who signed off on this? McGonagall asked, and there was something in her voice that Harry would have, at any other point in his life, identified as dangerous. Because those signatures in the older workings, Albus, those are not, you know whose those are. Minerva, who authorized charms on a 2-year-old child, this is not the time, then when is the time? She was speaking very quietly, which was somehow worse than shouting. When he's 30. When has it ever been the time, with you, for things you don't want to, Pomfrey? Dumbledore said it gently. Would you mind stepping out for a moment? I absolutely would mind, Pomfrey said, crisply, and did not move. He is my patient. Whatever you're about to discuss, you will discuss it here or not at all. Harry appreciated that considerably. Dumbledore looked at McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression that conveyed, very specifically, that she was not going to leave either, or soften her position, or make any of this easier. Then he looked at Harry. There are things I will need to explain to you, Dumbledore said. Not all of them tonight. Some of them I am, not yet prepared to explain in full, because I think the full explanation requires, who put them there? Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm not asking for the full explanation, Harry said. I'm asking one question. Who put them there? McGonagall made a sound. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment, and Harry looked back and didn't look away and didn't feel the particular weight he'd always felt before when an adult wanted him to stop asking something. He noticed its absence, noticed the place where it should have been and wasn't, and wondered if that was one of the 48. Some charm designed to make him small when someone with power wanted him smaller. Several people, Dumbledore said, finally, were involved. The original castings were done by a healer. A specialist. He paused. Acting under instruction. Whose instruction? That, Dumbledore said, is the part one am not yet prepared to, then come back when you are, Harry said pleasantly. Dumbledore blinked. It was a very small blink, barely visible, but Harry caught it and filed it along with the rest. We will begin removing them tomorrow, Pomfrey said, in her professional voice that ended conversations. One at a time, starting with the topmost layer and working down. I will need assistance from someone who can identify the charm architecture. Professor McGonagall, I'll need a word with you about that before you go. Mr. Potter, she looked at him. You'll stay here tonight. I want to monitor your core overnight before we begin. All right, Harry said. Dumbledore lingered for a moment in the way of someone who wanted to say something more and was choosing not to. Then he said, "Good night, Harry," in his warmest voice, and left. Harry watched the door close. Professor McGonagall, he said. Yes. She turned, still holding the near end of the diagnostic scroll. The signatures in the older workings, Harry said. You recognized them. Before he came in, you were about to say whose they were. He waited. I'm not asking you to tell me. I just want you to know I noticed. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was doing the complicated thing again, anger and concern and something that might have been the beginning of respect. Get some rest, Mr. Potter, she said quietly. She and Pomfrey moved to the far corner of the room, voices lowered, and Harry lay back on the hospital bed and looked up at the ceiling and listened to the distant sounds of the castle settling around him. 48, he thought. Not 47. Not a round number. 48 specific decisions, made over 9 years, by people who knew exactly what they were doing. 48 charms, each targeting something particular about him, some instinct, some memory, some inclination, decided by someone that he shouldn't have. He didn't feel frightened. He thought he should, maybe. But instead what he felt was something closer to the way he felt when he was working out a puzzle, the particular alertness of a mind engaging with a problem that has edges. He could feel the shape of it already. Someone had decided who Harry Potter should be, and had used magic to make it so, for almost a decade, and they had done it carefully and systematically enough that it had fooled a 1,000-year-old magical artifact that sorted children for a living. That was a significant amount of effort to put into one small boy. The question was why. And underneath that, quieter, more personal, was a different question: what would he be like when it was done? When all 48 were gone? He found he was looking forward to finding out. Down the corridor, the feast was presumably happening. Harry hadn't been sorted. He was lying in the hospital wing on his first night at Hogwarts with a diagnostic scroll that needed the floor to fit on, and somewhere in this castle there were people who had known about what was done to him and had chosen not to tell him. He thought about the way Dumbledore's knuckles had gone white. He thought about McGonagall's almost sentence, "Those are not, you know whose those are." He thought about the Sorting Hat saying, in front of everybody, "I refuse." And for the first time in his life, for what felt like the first time, though he had no way of knowing, Harry Potter smiled at a ceiling with something that was entirely, unreservedly his own. Something is about to change, he thought. He was right. By the time the castle had gone fully quiet, the feast over, the students settled into their dormitories, the ghosts drifting through their evening circuits, Madame Pomfrey had come back and cast 3 different monitoring spells over him, charmed the lights to dim, and settled herself at her desk with the diagnostic scroll and a quill, making notes in a hand so small and precise it might have been printed. Harry was not, technically, supposed to be awake. He was awake. He was listening to the castle. It had a sound, Hogwarts, not loud, nothing you'd call noise exactly, but a quality of being alive in a way buildings usually weren't. Somewhere, pipes ran with water. Somewhere, a portrait was having a conversation. The staircases moved with a low groan of ancient stone. And somewhere very close, just the other side of the wing's far door, he could hear, if he was very still, 2 voices. Both familiar. McGonagall, low and fierce, "You're going to call Severus." Pomfrey, firm and unarguable, "First thing in the morning. He'll recognize the architecture. He'll have to. He won't want to." "No," Pomfrey agreed. "He won't." A pause. Then McGonagall, quieter, "When I think about what that child's life has been like, if these charms were doing what the diagnostic suggests, Poppy, the suppression charm on his memory banks alone, I know. 9 years. Since he was 2, I know." A very long silence. "I should have looked," McGonagall said. "It came out rough, like something scraped off stone. I should have checked. When I left him on that doorstep I should have." "You were following orders," Pomfrey said. "I know that too." A door handle turned. "That's the part I'm having difficulty with tonight." Footsteps. A door. Harry lay in the dark and thought about a doorstep. Thought about being 2 years old and someone making a decision about who he would be. Thought about 9 years of systematic, magical diminishment, and how it had somehow managed to feel like normal. He breathed in. He breathed out. The pressure behind his eyes, the one he'd had since Diagon Alley, was still there. But it felt slightly different now. Less like something pressing in and more like something pressing out. "Hold on," he thought, to nothing in particular. "I'm coming." He closed his eyes, and slept, and didn't dream, or if he did, he didn't remember it. Only woke, later, to the early grey light of the Scottish Highlands coming through the high windows, and the sound of the castle beginning its day, and somewhere in the dungeons, already, at this hour, a door opening and sharp footsteps moving at a very deliberate pace. Someone had been called. Chapter 2, 48 Severus Snape arrived at the hospital wing at 6:43 in the morning, which was early enough that the corridors were still mostly empty and the portraits hadn't fully woken up. Harry knew the exact time because Pomfrey had a clock on the wall above her desk that ticked with the specific loud patience of something that had been keeping time in a hospital for decades and had opinions about people who didn't rest properly. Harry had been awake since 5. He'd given up on pretending otherwise around 5:30 and had been sitting up in the bed reading one of Pomfrey's dog-eared copies of Magical Diagnostics Quarterly, not because he understood most of it, but because it was there, and because doing something was better than doing nothing. The door opened. Snape came in without knocking. He was tall, which Harry hadn't fully registered from across the great hall. Black robes, black hair, a face arranged into an expression of controlled displeasure that looked like it might be the default setting. He took in the room, Pomfrey at her desk, McGonagall standing near the window with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, the diagnostic scroll still unfurled along the floor, and then his gaze landed on Harry and stayed there for exactly long enough to be pointed. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Professor Snape," Harry said. Snape looked at the scroll on the floor. He didn't move toward it immediately. He just looked at it from the doorway, like a man assessing whether something was going to bite him. "You've been awake for hours," Pomfrey said to Harry, not looking up from her notes. "I've been reading," Harry said. "Magical Diagnostics Quarterly is not recreational reading. It's more interesting than you'd think. The article on core suppression in the 3rd issue is, Mr. Potter." Snape crossed the room in a way that covered ground quickly without appearing hurried, crouched slightly, and picked up the near end of the scroll. He read. Nobody spoke. He read for a while. McGonagall set her tea down on the windowsill, and the small sound of the cup on stone was the only thing in the room. Then Snape said, "When was the full scroll completed?" "Last night, around 11, Pomfrey said. "And these signatures," his finger moved to a section about a third of the way down, the older entries. His voice didn't change. That was, Harry thought, actually the most informative thing about it. It stayed precisely level in the particular way of someone who has practiced keeping things out of their voice for a very long time. "Have you confirmed these are accurate?" "Diagnostic contamination from the sheer density of the layering could produce false. I ran it 3 times, Pomfrey said. "The signatures are consistent across all 3 readings." Snape was quiet. "Severus," McGonagall said. "She said his name the way you say the name of someone you've known for 20 years and are currently very worried about." "I see them," he said. "Do you recognize?" I said. "I see them, Minerva." He stood up, letting the scroll rest back against the floor, and turned to face the room properly. Whatever had been in his face a moment ago was gone. He looked, if anything, more closed than before, like additional shutters had come down. "The charm architecture," he said, "is consistent with the helix suppression method. It was developed, refined, rather, at St. Mungo's in the late 70s for legitimate therapeutic use. Memory trauma cases. Patients who had experienced severe magical fracturing. The idea was to temporarily bind specific behavioral responses while the core healed." He looked at the scroll again. The key word being temporarily. "How temporarily?" Pomfrey asked. 6 months at maximum. For an adult patient. For a child, he stopped. Something crossed his face, brief and unannounced, like a light under a door that closes before you're sure you saw it. "A child's core is still forming. Binding charms on a developing magical core are, the damage can be significant. That's why no legitimate healer would use this method on anyone under 12. "Someone did," McGonagall said. "Yes." Snape's voice was flat as stone. "Someone did. 48 times." Harry had been watching all of this with the attentive quiet he'd developed over 10 years of being in rooms where adults were talking about things that mattered and hoping he'd stay unnoticed enough to hear the rest. He set down Magical Diagnostics Quarterly. "Can you remove them?" he asked. Snape looked at him. It was a long look, not unkind, exactly, but intensely evaluative, the kind of gaze that was actually seeing rather than just looking. "I can," he said. "In the correct sequence. Removing them out of order would risk feedback, fragmentation, memory rupture," Harry said. Madame Pomfrey mentioned. Snape's eyes moved to Pomfrey, then back. "You've done your reading." The Diagnostics Quarterly had a piece on it. Volume 3. Something happened at the corner of Snape's mouth that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. "The sequence must be bottom-up," he said, dropping into the clinical tone of someone who is more comfortable in expert territory. "The oldest charms first, working forward. Each removal will need to be monitored for approximately 20 minutes before proceeding to the next, core stabilization. The process will likely take several sessions across multiple days. How many sessions? Harry asked. Impossible to say until I've mapped the full architecture. Each charm has its own depth and complexity. He paused. The process will not be painless. I didn't expect it to be, Harry said. Snape studied him for another moment. Then he turned to Pomfrey. I'll need a clear workspace, 3 stabilizing potions on hand, and I'd like the diagnostic scroll fixed to the wall where I can reference it. We start when the boy has had breakfast. The boy, McGonagall said, in a tone of mild correction. Mr. Potter, Snape amended, in a tone of mild unarguable precision. We start when Mr. Potter has had breakfast. He glanced at Harry again. You need to eat something. Not because I'm concerned about your feelings, because magical core work on an empty stomach produces unpleasant results, and I'd prefer not to deal with them at 7 in the morning. I'll eat, Harry said. Good. Snape moved toward the door, then stopped without turning around. The signatures in the older workings, he said quietly. I will explain them when there is a private moment and you are ready to hear it. Not, he said it over his shoulder, to the room, to McGonagall specifically. Right now. He left. The door swung closed with a sound that was somehow very final. McGonagall picked up her tea. Put it back down. Well, she said. Indeed, said Pomfrey. Harry looked at the clock. 6:49. Is there any chance of getting food up here, he asked, or do I have to go to the Great Hall and let everyone stare at me again? Pomfrey snapped her fingers. A house elf appeared, Pop, looked at her with enormous eyes, received instructions he seemed to find entirely reasonable, and vanished. 5 minutes later there was toast and eggs and a pot of tea on the small table beside his bed. Harry ate. The food was, objectively, the best food he had ever had, because the food he'd had for the first 10 years of his life had been whatever the Dursleys had decided was too leftover or too unappealing for themselves, and Hogwarts apparently ran on a different philosophy. McGonagall came and sat in the chair beside his bed while he was on his 3rd piece of toast. She didn't say anything for a moment. Harry waited. You don't seem frightened, she said. Of the removal process? Of any of it? Harry considered this, chewing. I'm not, he said. Should I be? Most 11-year-olds, on being told there are 48 binding charms on their magical core, would probably react differently, Harry agreed. But I've been in situations that were frightening and this doesn't feel like one. It feels more like, he searched for the word. Like finding out that a room you've been living in has a false wall. It's not frightening. It's just interesting to find out what's on the other side. McGonagall looked at him. Her expression had done the complicated thing again. You said something last night, she said. About me recognizing the signatures before Dumbledore arrived. I did. I want you to know, she stopped. Started again. There are things I should have questioned more carefully, over the years, that I did not question. Things I accepted on the basis of trust and respect, and a belief that the people making decisions understood things I did not. She said the next word carefully, like she was choosing it from a limited supply. Sorry for that. Harry looked at her. She was not a woman who apologized easily, he'd known her for about 12 hours and he already understood that much. Whatever it had cost her to say it was visible in the particular set of her jaw. I appreciate that, Harry said. I mean it. Thank you. She nodded, once, and stood up, and moved back to the window, and that was all. But something had been established, something quiet and solid, the way foundations are quiet and solid. Harry ate the rest of his toast. The morning came in through the windows, and the castle woke up around him, and somewhere in the Great Hall 600 students were eating breakfast and talking about the previous night, and Harry's name was almost certainly moving around the room in every possible direction. He thought about that for a moment, all those stories, all those versions of him being discussed over porridge, and found he didn't mind it much. Let them wonder. He had more interesting things to think about. Snape returned at 8 with the stabilizing potions and an expression that suggested the walk from the dungeons had not improved his morning. He set the potions on Pomfrey's worktable with the care of someone who respects volatile things, consulted the diagnostic scroll that Pomfrey had fixed to the wall with a sticking charm, and then drew up a stool beside Harry's bed with the air of a man who was going to be professional about this if it killed him. "Sit at the edge of the bed," Snape said. "Cross-legged is fine. I need access to your core from the front." He paused. "Do you understand what that means?" "Not specifically," Harry said. "A magical core, in simplified terms, sits approximately at the center of the body, not a physical location, but the magical body maps to the physical one. Core work is done from the front, at close range, in order to think of it as precision work. Distance affects accuracy." He uncapped one of the potions. "You'll drink this before we start. Stabilizing base, it creates a buffer between what I'm doing and the surrounding charm matrix so that the removal doesn't destabilize adjacent workings." Harry looked at the vial. It was bright blue and slightly luminescent and smelled, when he got close to it, like cold stone and something sharper underneath. "Is it horrible?" "Profoundly," Snape said, without any particular emphasis. Harry drank it. It tasted like if someone had taken a personality test, decided the answers were wrong, and then dissolved the results in vinegar. He made a face. Snape watched with the neutrality of someone who had warned him. "Now," Snape said. He drew his wand, 12 inches, something very dark, very fine. "The first charm is the deepest and oldest, 9 years old, anchored at the base of your core. It targets, according to the diagnostic, what the scan classifies as instinctual magical response. In practical terms, it has been suppressing your ability to perform instinctual wandless magic, the kind very young magical children do accidentally." "I did do that," Harry said. "Accidentally. There were several incidents with my cousin. Those were what leaked through," Snape said. "What your core was actually generating was likely considerably more significant. The charm filtered most of it, allowed small amounts through to prevent, the magical equivalent of a blocked pipe rupturing." He looked at Harry steadily. "When I remove this, there may be a surge. I need you to stay very still and do not, under any circumstances, try to control it consciously. Let it move through you. How will I know if I'm doing it wrong?" "You'll be trying to do something," Snape said. "Don't do anything. Passive." "Passive," Harry agreed. "Ready?" "Yes." Snape began to work. It was not, as experiences went, describable in any single word. There was a warmth first, a deep inside warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, the feeling of something fundamental beginning to move. Then a pressure that increased until Harry's hands gripped the edge of the mattress without him deciding to grip anything. Then something that wasn't pain exactly but was adjacent to it, a tearing sensation, but in reverse, like something coming unglued that had been stuck for a very long time. Then, release. It moved through him like the first deep breath after being underwater. Like unclenching a fist that had been clenched for so long it had forgotten being open. The warmth spread outward from his core to the edges of everything, and the candles on the wall behind Pomfrey's desk blazed briefly up to 3 times their normal size, and the window nearest to him cracked, not shattered, just a single clean crack, bottom to top, and then everything settled. Harry breathed. "Well," said Pomfrey, very quietly, looking at the window. Snape was watching Harry with an expression Harry couldn't fully parse. Clinical attention on the surface, but something else underneath it. Something like watching a fire take hold. "How do you feel?" Snape asked. Harry thought about the question properly. "Different," he said. Then, more. "More," Snape repeated. "More of whatever I am, I think." Harry looked at his hands. Nothing was visibly different. But there was a quality to the air around him that hadn't been there before, something humming at a frequency just below what you could actually hear. He could feel it. Like the world had slightly better resolution than it had yesterday. What does the next one do? Snape glanced at the scroll. Emotional processing. Specifically, the charm classified in the diagnostic as empathic range limiter, it has been narrowing your capacity to read and respond to emotional information. Essentially, you have been experiencing only a fraction of your natural emotional range. Harry considered this. Then he looked at McGonagall, standing by the window, and something landed differently than it had before, not just an observation but a feeling, full and clear, like a chord resolved. The guilt she'd been carrying all morning. The anger underneath it. The way she was holding herself like someone preparing for a sentence. All of it hit him simultaneously and with a depth that made him exhale sharply. "Oh," he said. "Yes," Snape said. "That charm came off with the first one. They were cross-anchored." "People are very," Harry stopped. Started again. "There's a lot going on with people, isn't there?" "Generally, yes," Snape said. He uncapped the second potion. "This one's worse than the first. Drink." By the third removal, around 10 in the morning, Harry had cracked 2 more window panes and somehow caused the curtains on the nearest bed to change color from white to a deep Prussian blue. He wasn't doing any of this on purpose. His magic was moving like water finding its level, not dramatic, not violent, just persistent and absolute. Between the third and fourth charms, Snape called a break for stabilization and sat back on his stool and looked at Harry with the particular quality of attention of someone reassessing something. "Ask," Harry said. Snape raised an eyebrow. "You want to ask something," Harry said. "You've been looking at me like you're deciding whether to." "The third charm was a memory suppressor," Snape said. "It was targeting early childhood memories, specifically those from age 2 onward. The removal process occasionally surfaces fragments of suppressed memory. I need to ask whether you've experienced anything like that in the last 20 minutes. Harry was quiet for a moment. The answer was yes, not clear images, nothing narrative, but flashes. A woman's voice, warm, saying something he couldn't quite hear. A man laughing. A house, small, cottage-like, something yellow about it. The smell of something burning that he'd always associated with the word accident without knowing why. "Yes," he said. "Fragments. They'll clarify over time as the suppressor continues to dissolve." Snape set his wand on his knee. "They may not be comfortable things to remember. Were they comfortable things to live through the first time?" Snape looked at the far wall. "No," he said. "They were not." There was a quality in the silence after that, something that said the conversation was touching something real, that Snape knew more than he was saying, that the not saying was deliberate and was costing something. "You knew my parents," Harry said. Snape's jaw moved slightly. "I knew your mother. The signatures in the older workings, not today," Snape said. "Not unkindly. Just absolutely. Today we work on the charms. The other conversation will happen when you're ready to hear it." Harry said. "That's what you said this morning." "When there's more of you to hear it," Snape said. "Currently there are still 42 binding charms on your core. When there are none, you can hear anything." He picked up his wand. "Ready for the fourth?" "Always," Harry said. The fourth, fifth, and sixth came off in the late morning, and by noon Pomfrey declared a session end and Harry ate lunch in the hospital wing and Snape went back to his dungeons with a measured tread and McGonagall went to teach her first scheduled class of the year. Harry lay back on the bed after lunch and thought. He was different from this morning. Objectively, measurably different in ways he could feel from the inside. There was more range to everything, thoughts had more texture, sensations had more depth. When a first-year walked past the hospital wing door arguing with a friend about something, Harry could hear the specific register of embarrassment under the argument without trying to. The world had gone from a painting to a landscape, dimensionally. And his magic, he was aware of it in a way he hadn't been before. Not dramatically. It wasn't sparking off him visually or doing anything performative. But it was there, present and awake, the way a large animal in the room is present even when it's sitting still. He was thinking about this when the door opened and Hermione Granger came in. She was still in her school robes, with a bag over one shoulder that appeared to contain approximately twice the books reasonably necessary for the first day of school, and she was walking with the particular energy of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. She stopped when she saw him, and checked herself slightly, like she'd expected to find something different than she found. "You're awake," she said. "I am," Harry agreed. "Good." She came in the rest of the way, pulled the chair that McGonagall had used earlier up to the side of his bed, and sat down. Then she put her bag down, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "I wanted to come last night but Professor McGonagall said visiting hours were suspended. So I came now because it's the lunch break and visiting hours weren't listed as suspended specifically for lunchtime, just evening." "That's very precise reasoning," Harry said. "Thank you. I also brought you this." She produced a book from the bag, not one of the school texts, something with a faded blue cover and a title that read Magical Binding and Release, a healer's reference in silver lettering. "It's from the library. I went this morning before breakfast and found it. I thought you might want to understand what's being done to you more technically." Harry took the book. Turned it over. "How did you know what to look for?" "I've been in the library since 6 this morning." She said it without embarrassment, just as a fact. "I read everything they had on behavioral binding charms. And core suppression. And diagnostic methodology." She paused. "And the history of Helix method charm casting, which is what Professor Snape was doing with you this morning. I could tell from the wand movement through the window in the door, it matches the description in the 3rd chapter of this book." Harry looked at the door, which had a small square window in it, and then back at Hermione. "Were you in the corridor all morning?" "I was in the corridor between 9 and 10, yes," she said, without any visible shame. "I'm sorry if that seems, I know it might seem intrusive, but I genuinely wanted to understand what was happening and I didn't know who else to ask and also," she stopped. "And also?" Harry said. She looked at him directly. She had very direct eyes, brown, clear, slightly combative in a way that suggested she'd spent time in rooms where being direct got her into trouble and had decided it wasn't worth modifying. "I noticed you on the train," she said. "Not just because you're Harry Potter. Because you were very quiet, and you were paying attention to everything in a way most people don't, and I thought," she reconsidered. "I thought you were interesting. And then what happened at the sorting was, I've been reading all morning and I still don't entirely understand how someone could cast 48 binding charms on an 11-year-old child and have nobody detect it, and I find that question very pressing, and I thought you might also find it very pressing, and so I came." Harry looked at her for a moment. She was already slightly pink at the cheeks, like she was anticipating him pointing out that she'd come specifically to interrogate a patient in the hospital wing. "I do find it very pressing," he said. "I've been thinking about it all morning." She visibly relaxed. "Good. What have you concluded?" "That I need more information," Harry said. "The diagnostic shows signatures, whoever cast the charms left traces. Snape recognized them. McGonagall recognized them. Neither of them have told me who specifically because they're protecting someone," Hermione said immediately. "Or because they're afraid of what I'll do when I know," Harry said. They looked at each other. "That's interesting," Hermione said. "Do you think they're right to be?" Harry thought about the cold precision he'd felt this morning, not anger, not grief, not any of the things he might have expected, just a clear-eyed awareness of the landscape of what had been done to him. "No," he said. "Probably not. I don't think knowing is going to make me explode. I just think knowing is, I think I'm owed it. And I'll find out eventually regardless." "Yes," Hermione said, with the satisfaction of someone who has reached the same conclusion via a slightly different route. "You will." She opened the book in his hands to the 3rd chapter. "Now. The Helix method, there are 6 foundational charm types in a helix stack, and they interact with each other in specific ways. The diagnostic will have classified your 48 into these 6 categories. If we can figure out which categories are still active, we can map the removal sequence, Harry said. Exactly. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is pleased in the specific way of finding an intellectual equal in an unexpected place. You're fast. You're thorough, Harry said. I think that's better. She smiled, a real one, not the polished social smile he'd seen on her face when she'd answered questions on the train for other people. This one was slightly asymmetric and entirely unguarded. I think we're going to get along, she said. I had the same feeling, Harry said. They spent the next hour with the book between them, Hermione explaining the charm typology with the precision of someone who had already cross-referenced it against 4 other sources, Harry asking questions that made her pause in a way that suggested she hadn't considered them yet, which pleased him and slightly delighted her. By the time Pomfrey came back from lunch and pointed firmly at the door, they had mapped out all 6 charm types, identified which ones were likely still active based on Harry's current perceived capability, and had a working theory about the removal sequence that Hermione was going to write up properly and which Harry was going to present to Snape tomorrow as if it had just occurred to him. That's slightly manipulative, Hermione said, gathering her bag. Slightly, Harry agreed. But Snape seems like the kind of person who'd be more receptive to an idea if he thought it was being considered rather than insisted on. She paused at the door. Looked back at him. You read people very quickly, she said. It's stronger today than it was yesterday, Harry said. One of the charms that came off was suppressing it. She stood in the doorway for a moment, book bag over her shoulder, and Harry could see the specific shape of what she was feeling, the particular quality of someone encountering something that expands their idea of what's possible, and the excitement of that, and the slight concern that goes with it. Does it bother you? She asked. What you can perceive now, versus before. He thought about it genuinely. No, he said. I think this is just what it's like to be me. I just couldn't access it before. She nodded. Good, she said. It shouldn't bother you. It's yours. She left. Harry lay back and looked at the ceiling and thought that was exactly the right thing to say. The afternoon brought 3 more removals, Snape returning at 2, more precise and faster now that he had the rhythm of Harry's core established, the stabilizing potions going down with only slightly less complaint. With each removal Harry felt the accumulation, like layers of gauze being peeled back, each one revealing something slightly more defined than what had been visible before. By 4 o'clock, with 9 charms removed and 39 still to go, something interesting happened. Snape was preparing the 10th removal, a charm the diagnostic labeled, Competitive Instinct Suppressor, which Snape explained with his usual clinical brevity as a charm specifically preventing Harry from recognizing or responding to social hierarchies with natural confidence, when Harry felt the one being removed catch on something. A resistance. Stop, Harry said. Snape stopped instantly. What? There's something underneath this one that isn't in the stack, Harry said. He pressed his hand to his sternum, not because it helped physically but because the feeling was central. Something it's anchored separately. Like it's locked onto the charm you're removing and something else simultaneously. Snape was very still. His wand hand hadn't moved. Can you describe the direction of the anchor? Down and to the left, Harry said. He knew that didn't mean anything spatially but it was the truest description he had. It's not in the chart. Snape looked at the diagnostic scroll on the wall. Read something near the bottom. His expression did a single, rapid thing that Harry caught but couldn't entirely identify, recognition and something underneath the recognition, something that lived between alarm and resignation. Pomfrey, he said. She was already moving. I see it. It wasn't in the original scan, she ran a diagnostic wand pass over Harry quickly. It's a different type entirely. Not a behavioral binder. This is she stopped. A tracking charm, Snape said. Cross-anchored to the 10th suppressor. If I remove the suppressor, the tracking charm releases its anchor and whoever is on the receiving end of it gets alerted, Harry finished. Right now. Snape looked at him. The clinical expression had gone, or rather, it was still there but something was moving behind it with more speed than before. Yes, he said. Effectively. Harry thought about this for approximately 3 seconds. Who gets alerted? I don't know, Snape said, which was the first time he'd said those words since he'd entered the hospital wing. But you can guess, Harry said. Snape said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Harry looked at the wall where the diagnostic scroll was fixed. Looked at the tracking charm notation Pomfrey had marked, small and to the side, outside the main stack. Someone had wanted to know when Harry's binding started being removed. Someone had built an alert into the system. Remove the suppressor, Harry said. Harry, Pomfrey started. Remove it, Harry said. Not aggressively, evenly, clearly, the way you say something when you've decided. Whoever gets alerted is going to find out eventually regardless. And I'd rather they find out now, while I'm here, with both of you present, than find out when I'm alone somewhere. He paused. Also, I'm curious who shows up. Snape looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, something warmer than professional. You're remarkably comfortable with bait, he said. I've had practice, Harry said. Living with the Dursleys teaches you to be comfortable with ambiguity. Snape's expression moved through something complicated and quick at the mention of the Dursleys. Filed. Very well, he said, and completed the removal. The 10th charm came off, a rush of something clear and cool through Harry's chest, the competitive instinct blooming back like a bruise reversing, not painful but vivid, and somewhere, Harry knew, something had pinged. Some magical notification, some alarm, some signal. They waited. 17 minutes later, the door opened. Not Dumbledore, that was Harry's first thought. Not McGonagall, who was in class. Not anyone he expected. The man who came in was old, not Dumbledore old, but old enough, with close-cropped grey hair and the careful bearing of someone who had spent a career in an institution. Healer's robes, white with silver piping. A badge on his lapel that Harry couldn't quite read from across the room. He came in with the confidence of someone who expected to be alone and stopped when he saw the room's occupants. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then Snape said, very quietly, Thaddeus. The man's eyes moved to Snape and something in his face went carefully, professionally blank. Severus, he said. I wasn't expecting you to be the one, Snape said. I thought he'd send someone else. He didn't send me, the healer said. The alert, I'm the one who keyed the alert, 9 years ago. It's keyed specifically to me. Harry looked at this man, this healer, who had keyed an alert to Harry's binding charms 9 years ago, and felt the full weight of his reconstituted emotional range land on the shape of this moment. Guilt, sharp and specific. Practiced justification underneath it. Underneath that, something genuinely complicated, not malice. This wasn't a man who had enjoyed what he'd done. He was a man who had decided what he'd done was necessary, and had been telling himself that for 9 years, and was now looking at the evidence of it sitting on a hospital bed reading him with eyes that were considerably more perceptive than he'd expected. Why? Harry asked. The healer looked at him. Looked at Snape. Back at Harry. Because, he said, I have spent 9 years half convinced I would need to undo what I did, and when the alarm went off I wanted to be the one who had to look at you when it happened. Harry considered this. That's more self-aware than I expected, he said. I'm a healer, the man said. Self-awareness is an occupational requirement. He didn't look away. I won't ask your forgiveness, Mr. Potter. I'm not sure I've earned the right to ask for it. I came because the alarm went off and I have a great deal to explain and I thought you deserved to hear it from the person who actually did the work. You cast them, Harry said. All 48. All 48, the healer confirmed. Over 9 sessions, beginning when you were 26 months old. His hands were at his sides, very still. The original instruction came from Albus Dumbledore. The justification given to me, and I believed it, which is its own kind of culpability, was that your magical profile at age 2 suggested a development trajectory that was, he stopped. That was what? Harry said. Alarming, the healer said simply. You were 2 years old and you were doing things that trained adult witches and wizards cannot do. The projected developmental curve, extrapolated forward, the assessment was that you would be, by 11, by 15, by 17, he spread his hands. The word used was ungovernable. The argument was that for your own protection and the protection of those around you, certain aspects of your development needed to be moderated. The room was very quiet. Moderated, Harry said. Yes. For 9 years. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. He wasn't angry, or rather, the anger was there but it was clean, not hot, more like a river than a fire. And Dumbledore told you to do it. Yes. Under whose authority? His own, the healer said. As your magical guardian. He filed the paperwork. There is a ministry form, for therapeutic core binding in cases of developmental emergency, and I completed the healer certification, and it was, he stopped again. Legal, he said. Technically legal. Not ethical. No, Harry agreed. Not ethical. He looked at Snape. Snape was looking at the wall. His jaw was set in the particular way of someone who is managing something large through sheer structural will. You knew? Harry asked him. No, Snape said. Not until today. His voice was exactly flat. Had I known, there would have been, he stopped. Finished with, there would have been a different series of events. Harry believed him. He wasn't sure why with any precision, the empathic range was still finding its edges, but he believed him. He looked back at the healer. Are you going to help? He asked. Snape's removing them. Are you going to help, or are you going to report this to Dumbledore? The healer was quiet for a moment. Something resolved in his face, some internal argument reaching its conclusion. I'm going to help, he said. I have the full casting record. Every charm, every anchor, every cross-link. I can give Professor Snape the complete architecture, which will make the removal significantly safer and faster. He paused. And I am not going to report this to Dumbledore. I should have refused his instruction 9 years ago. I'm not inclined to continue following it. Good, Harry said. He lay back on the pillow. The afternoon light was long and gold through the windows, casting everything warm. Somewhere in the castle, classes were ending, he could hear the distant shift of hundreds of students in motion, filling the corridors, getting loud and then quieter again. 39 charms still to go. Harry thought about Dumbledore, about ungovernable, which was a very specific word for a very specific fear. About a man who had looked at a 2-year-old child and decided the solution was a decade of systematic diminishment. He thought about the tracking charm, and how someone had wanted to know when this started being undone. He thought about all the things still underneath the surface, still to come off, still to be discovered about himself. Professor Snape, he said. Snape turned from his conversation with the healer. Yes. Tomorrow, Harry said. We keep going. First thing, Snape said. Good. Harry closed his eyes. I'll eat a proper breakfast this time. Something that was briefly, undeniably a smile crossed Snape's face before he turned away. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the hills, and the castle was settling into the particular rhythm of its first evening, and somewhere at the headmaster's desk in the highest tower, Albus Dumbledore was, almost certainly, looking at nothing in particular and thinking very carefully about what to do next. Let him think, Harry thought. He'd had 9 years. Harry had now. Chapter 3, What was taken 3 days into the removal process, Harry could feel whether. Not in the dramatic sense, not storm sense or magical weather reading or anything from a prophecy. Just the specific atmospheric pressure of rain coming in off the Scottish hills before it arrived, the way the air changed its character an hour before the sky did. He mentioned it to Hermione on the Wednesday morning, and she looked at him over her breakfast notes. She'd taken to bringing her work to the hospital wing during visiting hours, which Pomfrey had unofficially extended to accommodate the situation, and said, barometric sensitivity. It's in the chart. Charm 31, the environmental attunement suppressor. That one came off yesterday, Harry said. I know. I've been tracking the sequence. She turned her notebook to show him, a neat grid, 48 rows, removal date in one column, predicted effect in another, observed effect in a third. The observed effect column for Charm 31 read, weather awareness confirmed, also appears to be tracking the emotional states of people in adjacent rooms. Harry looked at the adjacent room's entry. Is that alarming? It's fascinating, Hermione said, in a tone that confirmed she and alarming were not currently on speaking terms. The empathic extension from Charm 4 combined with the environmental attunement from 31 is producing a compounded effect. You're essentially reading the castle the way you'd read a person. I've been trying to find a comparable case in the literature and I can't, which either means it's unprecedented or means the relevant literature is in the restricted section. Probably both, Harry said. She made a note. 19 charms down. 29 to go. Harry had been in the hospital wing for 3 days, which was, in his estimation, about 2 days too long for comfort. Not that Pomfrey's care was anything other than thorough, it was, with a precision that bordered on aggressive, but the combination of lying in a bed while significant things happened to his magical architecture and not being able to attend classes or move freely around the castle was producing in him a restlessness that was new and vivid and entirely his. He mentioned this to Snape on Wednesday afternoon, in the way of someone who has been thinking about it and decided it's relevant. Snape was mid-preparation for the 20th removal, consulting the healer's casting record, Thaddeus Frick, which was the healer's name, and he had come back each morning with the complete documentation and a willingness to be useful that Harry read as genuine guilt and active remediation. Snape cross-referenced Frick's notes against the diagnostic scroll, made marks in his own cramped notation, and said, without looking up, the restlessness is Charm 18 dissolving. The sedative instinct suppressor has been suppressing your natural inclination to move, engage, act. As it dissolves, I want to move, engage, and act, Harry said. Articulate as always, Snape said. He did look up, then. The removal process cannot be accelerated without risk. You know this. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking to accelerate it. I'm saying, he thought about how to say it precisely. I'm not good at staying still. I'm aware, Snape said. You have reorganized the items on Madame Pomfrey's supply table twice. The curtains are a color she has not yet located a reversal charm for. And yesterday you apparently held a 3-hour study session with Miss Granger that covered 3 weeks of charms syllabus. He paused. From a hospital bed. The book was good, Harry said. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, as if making a minor administrative note, McGonagall will be here this evening. I've suggested she bring a broomstick. Harry's restlessness did something immediate and specific. We're in Scotland in September. The weather won't be a problem for you, Snape said, very drilly. Apparently. They started the 20th removal, and it was, as they'd all agreed beforehand, likely to be the most complex so far. The healer's notes flagged it with 3 different warnings. It was a memory anchor, one of the deep series suppressors that had been layered into the bed of Harry's earliest memories and then had 9 years of other charms stacked on top of it. What it had been doing, in simple terms, was preventing Harry from accessing anything before the age of 4. The last 3 days had brought back fragments, the cottage, the voices, a green light that came with a feeling like falling, but the fragments were incomplete because this charm was still in the way, sitting like a wall with the rest of the memories pressed against the other side of it. Frick had flagged it with the notation, subject may experience acute emotional response upon release. Ensure appropriate support is available. Snape had read this and said nothing. Pomfrey had read it and quietly moved 2 extra chairs into the room. Hermione had read it, Harry had shown her Frick's redacted notes, and had come that morning with tea and a book and the particular quality of presence that said she intended to stay regardless of visiting hours. Ready? Snape asked. Yes, Harry said. The 20th removal was different from the others. The others had felt like release, like opening, like expansion. This one felt like the opposite first. Like something contracting before it broke. There was a heat in the center of him, deep and old, and then a pressure that built beyond what the previous removals had produced, and Harry held the edge of the mattress and didn't try to control any of it, and then it broke. Memory is not like opening a file. It doesn't come in order or with labels or with the clean narrative of a story someone's already told you. It comes the way it is, sensory and simultaneous and without warning. He was in a house. Small. Warm. There was firelight and the smell of something cooking, and a woman with red hair was laughing about something, leaning against a doorframe with her arms crossed and her eyes bright, green, exactly his shade of green, which landed in him like a key in a lock, and she was laughing at something a man had said, a man with dark untidy hair exactly like Harry's own, who was sprawled on a sofa looking enormously pleased with himself, and then the cottage and the flash of green and the sound that wasn't a sound but felt like the end of every sound, and Petunia Dursley's voice, flat and deliberate, saying she brought it on herself, she was always doing unnatural things, and a letter, dropped on a doorstep, in Dumbledore's handwriting. He knew it was Dumbledore's handwriting the way you know things in dreams, without having seen it before. Harry came back to the hospital wing. He was sitting on the bed. He was fine, the word fine meaning that he was physically intact and present and in possession of all his faculties. But his hands were very flat on his thighs, pressing down, and something was happening in his chest that was not distress exactly but was large and old and had been waiting behind that wall for 9 years. Hermione had put down her book. She was watching him with the stillness of someone who has decided that doing nothing is the correct thing to do and is committed to it. Snape was at the window, looking out, his back to the room. His shoulders were doing the thing Harry had come to recognize, the controlled set of them that meant something was being held in place through structural effort. They're dead, Harry said. It wasn't new information. He'd always known they were dead. But knowing something intellectually and knowing it in the full depth of everything you are, those were different countries. I can see them now. I can remember them. Yes, Snape said. To the window. She had my eyes, Harry said. Snape's shoulders moved. Just slightly. Just once. They were happy, Harry said. That's what he stopped. They were actually happy. Whatever else was happening, the war, Voldemort, all of it, in that house, they were happy. Hermione made a small sound. Nothing worded. Just present. Harry breathed in. Breathed out. Let the large, old thing in his chest be what it was, not shoved down, not managed, not filtered through a binding charm designed to keep him small enough to be convenient. Let it be grief, real grief, the weight of 2 people who should have lived and didn't, and the specific cruelty of having had access to them taken from him in layers over 9 years by a man who had looked at a 2-year-old boy and seen a threat. The window behind Snape developed a frost pattern on the inside of the glass, spreading from the center outward in a crystalline bloom, despite it not being cold enough for frost. It held for 30 seconds and then slowly dissolved. Charm 21, Snape said, from the window. Still not turning. The temperature response suppressor. He paused. That one's dissolving on its own in proximity to the emotional surge from 20. They were cross-anchored. You'll find your environmental expression will be stronger than usual today. I'll try to replace any windows I crack, Harry said. Snape turned around. His face was composed. There was something in his eyes, not pity, nothing so condescending as pity, but a recognition that was somehow worse and better simultaneously. He looked at Harry the way someone looks at a person who is carrying something they once carried themselves and understand the weight of precisely. "Your mother," he said, "was the best person I ever knew." The room was very still. "And I failed to protect her," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't give you a longer accounting of it today. But you should know that what has been taken from you, the memories, the access to who they were, that was wrong. Not in a way that can be remedied. But wrong." Harry looked at him. "You knew her well?" "We grew up together," Snape said. "Before Hogwarts. We were friends." He said the word friends the way you say a word that once meant everything and now means something too big for its own 4 letters. "She was the first person who told me what I was, magical. She was 10, and she was," he stopped. "Found a different approach. She was extraordinary. And she would have wanted you to know that." Harry held that. Held it carefully, the way you hold things that matter. "Thank you," he said. Snape nodded once, turned back to his preparation for the 22nd charm, and that was all. But it was enough. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough. Hermione, quietly, passed Harry his tea. He drank it. Outside, rain came in off the hills exactly when he'd known it would. McGonagall came at 7. She did, in fact, bring a broomstick, a school nimbus, sleek and professionally maintained, which she carried under her arm with the slightly incongruous practicality of a woman who has played Quidditch at a national level and considers a broom a tool rather than an indulgence. She also brought, in her other hand, Harry's school bag and a week's worth of class notes. "Poppy has agreed," she said, setting both down beside his bed, "that supervised outdoor air is medically indicated for the recovery process. She has indicated this constitutes a necessary therapeutic activity. In writing. So that there are no administrative questions." She specified supervised. Pomfrey called from her office. "I'm supervising," McGonagall said. They went to the back courtyard of the hospital wing, a small, enclosed space, stone-walled, private, with a patch of sky overhead that was doing exactly what Harry had predicted at breakfast: rain, persistent, fine, the kind that didn't care whether you were sheltered. McGonagall cast a weather-repelling charm with the quick efficiency of someone who's lived in Scotland for 40 years and has strong opinions about wet socks. She handed Harry the broom. He took it, and the moment his hand closed around the handle something in him settled, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just the simple specific recognition of a thing that belongs to a person finding its person. He mounted, pushed off, and rose. 15 feet. 20. The walls of the courtyard dropped away below him and the Scottish hills opened up in all directions, dark and enormous in the rain, and the air was cold and sharp and entirely, magnificently real. He flew for 11 minutes before McGonagall called him back down, and in those 11 minutes he didn't think about charms or diagnostics or Dumbledore or Thaddeus Frick or any of it. He just flew, with the full sensory range of a person who was becoming, slowly and irrevocably, entirely himself. When he landed, McGonagall was watching him with an expression that she immediately reassembled into something more professional. "You've flown before," she said. "Never," Harry said. She looked at him. "At the broom." "Back at him." "Never." "First time," Harry said. He handed the broom back. She took it, and was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone recalibrating multiple things simultaneously. "The class notes," she said finally. "I included a letter from each of your professors explaining the assignments you've missed. Flitwick wants you to attempt the practical work in the wing if Pomfrey permits. Professor Quirrell has sent his notes." She paused briefly on Quirrell's name in a way Harry noticed. "I've included my own first-week Transfiguration syllabus. If you wish to keep up, I'll need the wand work for Transfiguration," Harry said. "Hermione's been going through the theory with me, but I'll arrange a session," McGonagall said. "Once you're cleared for practical magic." Harry nodded. Then he said, "The broom. The courtyard." He met her eyes. Thank you. She looked away briefly. Don't thank me for 11 minutes in the rain. I'm not, Harry said. I'm thanking you for the other thing. She didn't ask what the other thing was. She knew. He knew she knew. Go in, she said. Pomfrey will worry. He went. The fourth day of the removal process brought Neville Longbottom. Not intentionally, or not on Neville's part. Harry was sitting up in the hospital bed with McGonagall's transfiguration notes spread across the blanket when the door opened and Neville appeared, looking like someone who had walked here with purpose and was now second-guessing it actively at the threshold. Hi, he said. Hi, Harry said. Come in. Neville came in. He was round-faced and earnest and had the specific quality of someone who apologizes in advance for existing in a room without anyone having criticized him for it yet. He had his hands in his robe pockets and he stood just inside the door like he wasn't sure whether he'd been granted landing rights. I heard about what's happening, Neville said. The charms. Everyone's heard, there's not exactly a way to, he stopped. Started again. I just wanted to see if you were, I'm in Gryffindor, we're in the same house. Technically. Except you haven't been sorted yet, so I don't know if that counts, but I thought, sit down, Neville, Harry said. Neville sat down in the chair, which was becoming a very used piece of furniture. He looked at the transfiguration notes. Are those McGonagall's? She brought them last night. The handwriting's slightly alarming but the content's good. I know, Neville said, with the feeling of someone who has spent significant time being alarmed by McGonagall's handwriting. She's brilliant, she's just, a lot. He looked at Harry. Are you alright? I mean, he gestured vaguely. Is it going okay? It's going well, Harry said. Snape's very good at this. Neville's face did something interesting at Snape's name, not the simple fear response Harry had seen from other students, but something more layered. Yeah. He is actually very good at the technical stuff. He paused. He's difficult in class. I'll probably find that less of a problem than most people, Harry said. Because you're not afraid of him? Partly, Harry said. Partly because I think he's going to be interesting to know. He looked at Neville. What are you not saying? Neville blinked. How do you came here with something specific, Harry said. Not just to check in. You've been building up to it since you sat down. Neville was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up and said, in a slightly different register, quieter, less tentative, when you were being scanned. The diagnostic. Pomfrey did he stopped. She ran additional diagnostics on several students after yours, apparently. A precautionary measure. She told Professor McGonagall. Harry waited. She ran one on me, Neville said. 2 days ago. I didn't know until last night. My gran came up from London and she and McGonagall were in the corridor outside the portrait hole and I heard, he stopped again. Then, I have charms on me too. Not like yours, not behavioral suppressors. Different type. The diagnostic, he put his hands flat on his knees. The diagnostic shows I have 3 magical development limiters. They've been suppressing my power output. Making me, he swallowed. Making me seem less than I am. Harry looked at him. Saw the shape of what this was costing to say, not just the information but the reassembly happening around it. The way a person's understanding of themselves shifts when they find out the floor they've been standing on is false. Who put them there? Harry asked. My gran, Neville said. Not maliciously, that's what McGonagall said, that she believes Augusta put them there because after my parents, his face did something careful and controlled that said this particular topic had its own history of being carefully controlled. My parents are in St. Mungo's. They were tortured. You probably know, people know. He said it quickly, the way you say things you've learned to say quickly so they don't have time to hurt too much on the way out. My gran was afraid that if I showed strong magic, Voldemort's remaining followers might target me. So she had a healer put the limiters on when I was 4. A pause. She was protecting me. I know, Harry said. She wasn't trying to, I know, Harry said again. It doesn't have to be malicious to do damage. Neville looked at him. Something in the look was very direct, not the tentative quality of before but something more genuine underneath it. They're removing yours, he said. McGonagall wants to remove mine too. Gran has agreed, McGonagall was apparently quite pointed about it. He almost smiled. My gran is not used to being pointed at. No one is, with McGonagall, Harry said. Are you going to let them remove yours? Yes, Neville said, without hesitation. Which was interesting, because hesitation was his default mode. Yes. I want to know what I actually am. He said it with a quiet certainty that had more weight in it than anything tentative. I've spent my whole life being told I was barely magical enough for Hogwarts. My great-uncle used to throw me off things to see if I'd do any magic on the way down. Harry stared at him. He threw you off things. Nothing fatal, Neville said, quickly. Just, a pier, once. And a window, but it was a first-floor window. He paused. I bounced. Apparently that runs in the family. That's not normal, Harry said. I know that now, Neville said. Then, with the specific dry humor of someone who has decided their history is either funny or unbearable and has chosen funny, I thought it was just what families did. Turns out yours throw you in a cupboard and mine throw you off piers. He looked at Harry directly. We were both being made small by the people who were supposed to be keeping us safe. Harry held that. It was true. It was specifically, precisely true, and the full weight of it, now that he had the emotional range to hold the full weight, was considerable. When are they removing yours? He asked. Tomorrow morning, Neville said. Pomfrey's going to do it. They're simpler than yours, apparently, 3 limiters, no cross-anchoring, relatively clean architecture. I'll be having mine done at the same time, Harry said. So if you want company, yes, Neville said, immediately. I'd like that. Yes. They sat for a moment in the particular comfortable quiet of 2 people who have understood each other at a sufficient depth that silence isn't awkward. We're going to be formidable, aren't we? Neville said. It came out slightly surprised, like the thought had arrived before he'd decided to think it. Harry looked at him. Felt the truth of it, not arrogantly, not as a boast, just as a plain assessment of the situation. Yes, he said. I think we probably are. Neville nodded. Stood up. Then paused and said, I might stop by Hermione Granger's dorm on the way back. She's been leaving research notes about binding charms in the common room for people to find and pretending she didn't put them there. She did that? Harry said. She's trying to be helpful without appearing to be imposing, Neville said. I find it quite endearing. He paused. She's also been correcting everyone's charms homework and leaving it back before they notice. She's not very subtle. I'll mention it to her, Harry said. Neville left. Harry sat with the transfiguration notes and the rain against the windows and the specific feeling of something clicking into place, people, specifically. The right ones finding each other in the particular way that doesn't feel like accident, feels more like inevitability recognized. On the 5th day, 26 charms down, 22 to go, something arrived. Not a person. A letter. It came with the morning post, a gray owl, unremarkable, no distinguishing features. The letter had no return address and the handwriting was deliberately generic, printed rather than cursive, the kind of handwriting that could belong to anyone. Harry turned it over. Turned it back. Opened it. Stop asking questions. What's done is done. Further investigation will bring consequences you are not equipped to manage. That was all. Harry read it twice. Then he handed it to Pomfrey, who handed it to Snape, who arrived 12 minutes later with the focused intensity of someone who has rerouted his morning to deal with something that has annoyed him. Snape examined the letter without touching it, a diagnostic charm first, then a trace charm, then something more complex that Harry didn't recognize. His expression, while he worked, was that of a man doing a precise job and not inclined to perform feelings about it. Then he set down his wand. "The trace won't resolve," he said. "It's been cleaned. Professionally cleaned, not a student prank, not a casual concealment. Someone with genuine skill did this." He looked at Harry. "Your reaction?" "I'm not scared," Harry said. "If that's the question." "It wasn't," Snape said. "I know you're not scared. The question is strategic. What do you think this tells us?" Harry looked at the letter. "That someone knows the investigation is ongoing but doesn't have direct access to information about it. Otherwise they'd know that the investigation is specifically about identifying who authorized the charms, and they'd have sent a more targeted threat." He paused. "They're working from incomplete information. They know the charms are being removed, but they don't know what we know yet." Snape was quiet. And the word consequences is specific," Harry said. "They're not saying I'll get hurt. They're saying there will be consequences, which is the language of institutional power. People who have leverage over systems, over information, over bureaucratic machinery." He looked at Snape. "Not a Death Eater sending this. A bureaucrat." Snape picked up the letter. Looked at it. Said nothing for a moment. "Then, there are people in the ministry who are aware of what was done to you. Who had institutional knowledge of the Form 4B Dumbledore filed. It's a ministry form, which means it exists in a ministry archive, which means ministry employees could theoretically be invested in the situation remaining, contained." "Who knows about the form?" Harry said. "I've been looking into that since Frick provided the documentation," Snape said. "The form was filed under a restricted classification, minimal access. But restricted does not mean no access. There are 3 people in the Department of Magical Law who would have had the clearance to view it." "Names?" Harry said. "Working on that," Snape said. "I have," he paused. "Contacts who are looking into it." Harry held his gaze. "You're moving carefully." "I am," Snape said. "Because the situation merits care. You have 22 charms still on your core, which means you're not yet at full capacity, and while what you are right now is," he stopped. Chose words carefully. "Considerably more than anticipated. You are not at full capacity. And moving against institutional power prematurely, without the full picture, would be a mistake," Harry said. "Yes," Snape said. "So we continue the removals, we continue the investigation, and we do both efficiently." "And the letter?" Snape pocketed it. "I'll handle the letter." Harry didn't ask how. He thought he probably had some idea, and he thought Snape's idea was likely to be more effective than what a first year could arrange, so he filed it and moved forward. The morning session was 6 removals, a cluster of cross-anchored charms near the top of the stack, the ones laid most recently, some within the last 2 years. These were different in character from the deeper ones, less about who Harry was and more about what he could do. Social confidence. Competitive instinct. Academic ability. There was a charm specifically suppressing his capacity to retain and connect information at full depth, which Hermione found so offensive when Harry told her about it that she put down her notes and spent 30 seconds looking at the wall in a way that suggested she was having very specific thoughts about the people responsible. By the end of the morning session Harry was at 22 down and 26 to go, and the difference was cumulative in a way that was becoming difficult to ignore. He could feel his own magic now the way you can feel your own heartbeat, not constantly at the forefront but always available, always there, with a depth and steadiness that had a quality of enormous patience to it. Like something very large that has been still for a long time and is only now beginning to move. McGonagall came for the afternoon and set up a transfiguration practical in the corner of the hospital wing with a set of small objects and increasingly complex target forms. Harry worked through them with her, not quietly, not cautiously, but with the full attention of a mind that was eating new information with a kind of hunger that 9 years of suppression had apparently stored up. He transfigured a matchstick to a needle on the third try. The second was technically correct but slightly too large. McGonagall looked at both results without speaking for a moment and then moved the match and produced a teacup. "Let's see if we can get through the first 6 weeks of syllabus this afternoon," she said. Harry looked at the teacup. "Won't that bother Flitwick? If I cover his material before his class?" McGonagall's expression said very clearly that she was not currently thinking about Flitwick's feelings. "We'll move at your pace," she said. "Not the syllabuses." He worked. Outside the rain came and went. Neville came in for his own session with Pomfrey and they exchanged a nod across the room in the particular manner of people doing parallel difficult things, which is its own kind of company. Hermione arrived at 5 with dinner from the Great Hall packed in a napkin, distributed it between the 3 of them without being asked to, and joined the transfiguration session as a participant until McGonagall pointed out, without particular displeasure, that she wasn't cleared for the hospital wing practical sessions. "I'm not a patient," Hermione said. "No," McGonagall agreed. "You're a very persistent Gryffindor, which is an entirely different category." Hermione beamed. It was not, Harry noted, a compliment she had been collecting all her life. The persistent part had historically been a complaint, and having it framed as a virtue landed on her face with the particular warmth of something long overdue. Evening came. Neville left with 2 of 3 limiters removed and the slightly dazed quality of someone who has just discovered the rooms in their house are twice the size they thought. He kept looking at his hands. Harry understood the impulse. Snape came back at 7 with the information about the ministry letter. "Bartemius Crouch," he said, without preamble, sitting down. "Senior. Department of Magical Law Enforcement." He had access to the 4B filing, he processed it, in fact, 9 years ago. He is the person who classified it restricted. He would have the most to lose from it becoming public record. Harry thought about this. He's invested in keeping it quiet because he was complicit. Because he authorized the classification, Snape said. Which means he read the filing. Which means he was aware of what Dumbledore was doing, and he chose restricted classification rather than investigation. He would argue it was within his administrative discretion, it was, technically. "But the optics are terrible," Harry said. "If it comes out." "If," Snape said. He looked at Harry. "Is it going to come out?" "Yes," Harry said, without any particular heat. "All of it is going to come out. Not because I want to burn anyone down, though I'll note that Crouch and Dumbledore and Frick have all done things that deserve consequences. But because the only way to ensure this doesn't happen again, to me, to Neville, to whoever else," he stopped. "Are there others?" Snape was quiet. "Snape," Harry said. "I have found reference in Frick's records to 3 other 4B filings during the same period," Snape said. "I do not have the names attached to those filings yet. He seemed to find the next word slightly difficult. "I'm working through channels that require some discretion to access." 3 others. Harry sat with that for a moment. 3 other children, somewhere, with binding charms on their cores, living diminished lives because someone powerful had decided it was necessary for someone's protection, theirs, or others, or the world's, or just the convenient maintenance of a particular balance of power. "Find the names," Harry said. "I am," Snape said. "How can I help?" Snape looked at him steadily. "By getting through the remaining 26 charms without cracking every window in the wing," he said. "And by sleeping, which you are persistently failing to do." "I sleep," Harry said. "4 hours is not sleeping, it's a prolonged rest," Snape said. He stood. "I'll be here at 7. Eat breakfast before I arrive." "You say that every day." And every day you've eaten 3 pieces of toast and called it sufficient, Snape said. It is not sufficient. Eat the eggs. He left. Harry looked at the window across the room. No frost pattern tonight, no cracked panes, just the rain against the dark glass and the reflected candlelight. He could feel the 26 remaining charms the way you feel a knotted rope, not painful, just present, the specific texture of something still constrained. 26 more. He thought about what Snape had said, 3 others. He thought about Neville's face when he'd said we were both being made small by the people who were supposed to keep us safe. He thought about the warning letter, consequences you're not equipped to manage, and the specific arrogance of that, the assumption that 11 years old and partially bound and a week into his own unraveling was the limit of what Harry Potter was equipped to manage. He reached for the Transfiguration notes. He read until the candles burned low, and then he read by the light of his own magic, which had begun, quietly, without his direction, to provide illumination when he needed it. A soft gold glow at the edge of his peripheral vision, available and steady. He hadn't decided to do that. It had simply happened, the way things happen when the thing doing them finally has room to move. He smiled at the page. 26 more. Chapter 4, The Architecture of Control. The last charm came off on a Tuesday. Not the last of all 48, they were at 36 removed, 12 to go, and Snape had estimated 2 more sessions to clear the remainder. But the 36th was, according to Frick's documentation, the final charm from the original casting series. Everything after it, charms 37 through 48, had been added over the following years, maintenance castings, refinements, adjustments made as Harry grew and his suppressed development pressed against the existing constraints in ways the original architecture hadn't anticipated. The 36th charm was the one that had been suppressing his strategic cognition. Snape told him this before removing it, with the tone of someone providing a clinical briefing and the eyes of someone watching for something specific. Strategic cognition, he said, encompasses your capacity to process multiple variables simultaneously, anticipate consequences across extended timelines, and make decisions under incomplete information without significant delay. So it was making me impulsive, Harry said. It was making you manageable, Snape said. He removed it. What happened to Harry's thinking was not dramatic from the outside. He didn't glow or convulse or announce anything. He simply went very still for about 30 seconds, and then the quality of his attention changed. The room had always been vivid to him, increasingly so over the past week, but now it acquired a kind of depth that was different in character. Like gaining a dimension. He looked at Pomfrey's supply table and catalogued everything on it in approximately 4 seconds. He looked at the diagnostic scroll on the wall and reread everything he'd already read a dozen times and understood 3 things he hadn't understood before. He looked at Snape and immediately, without deciding to, mapped everything he knew about Severus Snape into a pattern that had not been fully visible to him until this moment: the man's loyalties, his damage, his considerable capabilities, his specific grief, and understood for the first time how carefully Snape had been managing this entire situation, and for whose benefit. "Oh," Harry said. Snape watched him. "You've been feeding information to someone," Harry said. "Not just investigating through channels. Someone specific. Someone you trust, which is a short list." He paused. "Dumbledore?" "No," Snape said. "McGonagall," Harry said. Snape said nothing, which was yes. "And she's been deciding what to do with it," Harry said. "Building something. A case, or a position, or," he looked at the window. "She's going to Dumbledore." "Not yet, but soon. She's been gathering enough to corner him properly. She has been discussing the situation with several parties," Snape said, with careful precision. "The specifics of those conversations are hers to share or not." "I'm not criticizing it," Harry said. "It's the right move. The right sequence." He turned back to Snape. "Dumbledore knows it's coming. He's been preparing something." "What is it?" Snape's expression shifted slightly, something between appreciation and mild unease. the expression of a chess player who has just had an opponent pick up a piece they weren't supposed to notice yet. "I believe," Snape said carefully, "that Dumbledore intends to get ahead of the situation by coming to you directly. Before McGonagall forces the confrontation. He will want to frame the conversation himself. When? Based on the information I have, soon. Possibly today." Harry thought. "Good," he said. "Let him come." Snape looked at him steadily. "You understand that Albus Dumbledore is, the most politically powerful wizard in Britain, probably Europe, the head of the Wizengamot, the head of this school, and the person who spent 9 years systematically dismantling who I was," Harry said, calmly. "Yes. I understand all of that. Let him come." Snape was quiet for a moment. Then he said, almost to himself, "There it is. The strategic cognition." Harry said. "The reason," Snape said, "that someone looked at a 2-year-old child and felt it necessary to do something about it." They held each other's gaze. "Are you worried?" Harry asked. "About you going up against Dumbledore at 11 years old with 12 charms still on your core?" Snape said. "Professionally, yes. Personally," he paused. Something crossed his face that was brief and unguarded and honest. "No," he said. "Not particularly." Harry nodded. "Do the next removal," he said. "Let's get through as many as we can today." They worked through 4 more before lunch, 37, 38, 39, 40, and by the time Pomfrey called the morning session at 11:30, the cumulative effect of everything that had been removed over 10 days had produced in Harry something that was significantly beyond what he'd been a week ago. Not just in terms of what he could perceive or feel. In terms of what he simply was, the texture of his thinking, the depth of his magical presence in the room, the way every sense had sharpened into something with more information in it than the previous version of those senses had known to receive. He was still, in some technical sense, bound. 8 charms remaining. But those 8 were the topmost layer, the most recent additions, the maintenance castings, and what was underneath them, what had been freed in the previous 40, was already considerably more than anyone outside this hospital wing had seen. Except possibly Dumbledore. Who, Harry suspected, had been counting. Hermione arrived at noon with lunch and an expression Harry had come to identify as her research face, the particular animation of someone who has found something in a book that has reordered their understanding of something else. She set food on the table, sat down, pulled out a notebook. "The restricted section," she said. Harry looked at her. "You went in?" "I went in," she confirmed. "Last night, after visiting hours. I borrowed Professor Flitwick's written permission slip. He signed one for a different book and the date was non-specific. I know that's technically. Tell me what you found," Harry said. She opened the notebook. "There's a collection of ministry correspondence from the early 80s, original copies, duplicates held at Hogwarts under the library's archival function. Most of it is standard administrative material. But there's a subsection classified under Ministry Order 7R, which is a wartime classification from the First Voldemort War." She paused. "In that subsection, there are 6 documents referencing a program. Not explicitly described, the language is coded throughout, bureaucratic obscurement, but when you read them together the shape becomes clear." "What shape?" Harry said. "A systematic program for the identification and suppression of children with magical profiles that exceeded a specific projected threat threshold," Hermione said. She said it in the measured tone of someone who has been sitting with something upsetting long enough to report on it clinically. "The program has a designation, Ministry Order 7R, subsection Delta. Delta Protocol, informally. It ran from 1979 to 1982, during the peak of the First War." Harry was quiet. "Harry," Hermione said. "It's not just you and Neville. The program targeted, the documents reference 12 children during that period. Children with sufficiently unusual magical profiles to be flagged by the Ministry's developmental monitoring systems." She turned her notebook to show him a page of her own notes, a list, 12 entries, names redacted in the originals, represented in her notes only by initials and birth years. I can't get the names from the restricted section documents. The names are in a separate file that's in Frick's records, Harry said. Hermione's eyes went sharp. Is it? He mentioned 3 other 4B filings, Harry said. I asked Snape to find the names. But if the program had 12 children, then Snape's 3 are only the ones Frick personally worked on, Hermione said. She was already writing. The other 9 were handled by other healers. Possibly other methods. She looked up. Harry, if Dumbledore organized this, if he was the authorization point for the whole Delta Protocol, then we need the full documentation, Harry said. Not fragments. All of it. The names are likely in a ministry archive, Hermione said. Specifically in the Department of Magical Law, Crouch's department. The restricted section has copies of the program framework but not the individual subject files. Which are in the same place as the 4B forms, Harry said. In a restricted archive in the Ministry of Magic, Hermione said. Which we cannot access because we are 11, and at a school, and McGonagall can access it, Harry said. She'd need grounds, Hermione said. Official grounds. The Ministry can refuse access without a formal investigation being opened, which requires a formal complaint, Harry said. Which requires a victim. They looked at each other. You, Hermione said. Me, Harry said. And Neville. 2 documented victims with full diagnostic evidence and a healer's casting record who has already expressed willingness to testify. He thought. That's enough to open a formal investigation. Once it's open, the archive access is mandatory. You'd have to make the complaint officially, Hermione said. To the Ministry. As a minor, you'd need a magical guardian to, she stopped. Dumbledore is your magical guardian. Not for much longer, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. You already have a plan. He did have a plan. Several, in fact, running in parallel, which was new. The old Harry could hold one plan at a time and even then with effort. The new Harry, with the strategic suppression lifted, was running simultaneous tracks and finding it comfortable. I have a plan, he confirmed. I need a few things from you. Tell me, Hermione said. The restricted section documents, can you get copies? Even partial ones? I can describe them in detail from memory, Hermione said. I have photographic recall when I'm focused. Harry had been aware of this since approximately the 2nd day of their acquaintance but hadn't said so, on the basis that it wasn't a useful thing to announce to people before they trust you. Write up everything you remember. As much detail as possible. I'll need it tonight. Done, she said. What else? Neville, Harry said. I need to know if he's willing to make a formal complaint alongside me. Ask him. Don't push. I won't need to push, Hermione said, with the certainty of someone who had spent a week observing Neville's particular variety of quiet determination. He'll say yes. And I need, Harry said, someone to find McGonagall and tell her that I'd like to see her this afternoon. Not urgently. Casually. Don't make it sound like you're strategically positioning before Dumbledore shows up. Hermione said. Harry looked at her. Yes. Because you already know he's coming. Hermione said. Because Snape told me this morning, Harry said. And because Dumbledore is the kind of person who would come today, after the 36th removal, because today is the first day that his tracking mechanisms, he has them, I'm confident, would have shown him that my strategic cognition is unbound. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he's been monitoring the removals. I think so, Harry said. Not the tracking charm, that was Frick's and it alerted on the removal, so Dumbledore would know the process is happening. But something else, something ambient, possibly through the school's own monitoring systems, which a headmaster would have access to. He paused. He waited this long, which means he wanted to know what he'd be dealing with. Today's result told him. And now he's coming to deal with it himself, Hermione said. Before McGonagall can deal with it for him, Harry said. Yes. Hermione closed her notebook. Stood up. Looked at him with the particular expression she'd had that first day, the one that said fascinating and something else underneath it that was warmer than that. You know, she said, you're considerably more alarming than you were a week ago. Is that a problem? Harry said. Absolutely not, Hermione said. I'll find McGonagall. Eat your lunch. She left. Harry ate his lunch. He looked at the window, 8 clouds moving fast across the Scottish sky, wind up, the air carrying the specific quality of a front pushing through. He felt it in his skin. He ate the eggs. McGonagall came at 2. She came with a cup of tea she actually drank this time, which Harry had learned to read as a positive indicator, and she sat in a chair by his bed with the bearing of a woman who suspects she has been summoned for a reason and has decided to be fine about it. You wanted to see me, she said. Dumbledore is coming today, Harry said. She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. What makes you think so? He explained his reasoning, cleanly, efficiently, because the strategic cognition made the communication of complex logic considerably faster and because McGonagall was not a person who needed or wanted elaboration beyond what was precise. She listened without interrupting, which was the sign of someone who was both following and already confirming, internally, that what he was saying was consistent with what she knew. When he finished she said, yes. He's coming this evening. He told me this morning he intended to speak with you. He framed it as a welfare check. What do you think of that framing? Harry said. I think Albus has not had an honest welfare check impulse in 30 years without a strategic layer underneath it, McGonagall said, with the specific plainness of a woman who has loved someone for a long time and arrived at clear-eyed understanding of exactly what they are. Harry nodded. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to help me with something. The two things are connected. He told her about the Delta Protocol. He told her about Hermione's restricted section research, the 12 children, the Ministry archive, the 4B filings, Crouch's involvement. He told her cleanly and in order, leaving nothing out, watching her face do controlled things as she processed each piece. When he finished there was a silence. 12 children, she said. Possibly more, Harry said. The documents Hermione found cover the period 79 to 82. If the protocol continued beyond 82, then we're talking about an ongoing program, McGonagall said. Something moved in her face that was old and cold and entirely distinct from her professional composure. Albus, she said quietly, to no one in particular. Not calling him. Just saying the name. The way you say a name when you are comprehensively disappointed in a person. What I need, Harry said, is a formal magical guardian replacement. Today, if possible. Before Dumbledore arrives. McGonagall looked at him sharply. He's my magical guardian, Harry said. Which gives him certain legal authorities over decisions made about my magical welfare. That includes the ability to slow down or redirect the investigation, to claim guardianship authority over the complaint process, to control the timing. If he's still my guardian when we file the formal complaint, he can complicate it significantly, McGonagall said. She was already thinking, he could see it, the rapid internal processing of a woman who understood institutional mechanisms very well. To replace a magical guardian under Ministry protocol requires either the guardian's voluntary relinquishment or a finding of guardianship failure by a licensed Wisengamot member or a request from the ward, Harry said. A ward can request review of their guardianship at any time, according to Section 44 of the Guardianship of Magical Minors Act, if they can demonstrate that the current guardian is not acting in the ward's best magical interest. McGonagall stared at him. Hermione pulled the relevant section this morning, Harry said. She also flagged a related precedent from 1961, in Re. Beauridge, in which the Wisengamot ruled that documented evidence of medically harmful magical interference by a guardian constituted grounds for expedited review within 48 hours. "You want me to file the request," McGonagall said. "I want you to file the request," Harry confirmed. "As the senior staff member with current pastoral responsibility. Frick's casting record, Pomfrey's diagnostic, the Ministry 4B filing, we have more than enough for expedited review." McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. Not the quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of someone checking their own position carefully before committing to it, which was a different thing. "If I do this," she said, "Albus will know immediately. He will know who filed it and he will know what it means." "Yes," Harry said. "And you want him to know," she said. "I want him to come this evening having already received the filing," Harry said. "Because I want him to come to this conversation having lost the institutional advantage before it starts. I want to have that conversation on equal footing, not with him holding the legal authority of my guardian over the discussion." He paused. "I'm not interested in ambushing him. I'm interested in a conversation where neither of us has a lever the other doesn't know about." McGonagall set down her teacup. She looked at Harry with the expression she'd been developing for him over the past week, the one that wasn't quite what she had for a student, wasn't quite what she had for a colleague, was something specific to him that didn't have a clean category. "You are 11 years old," she said. "I say that not as a criticism. I say it because I am still adjusting." "Take your time," Harry said. She almost smiled. "I'll file it this afternoon," she said. "The request will land on the Duty Wisengamot member's desk by 4 o'clock. Albus will have a notification copy by 4:30. "Thank you," Harry said. She stood. Moved toward the door. Stopped. "Harry." She said his name the way she'd said Dumbledore's name earlier, with weight and precision and a quality of reckoning with what it contained. "When he comes tonight. Be careful. Not afraid. Not soft. But careful." She paused. "He is a man who is very good at making people feel that what he did was for the best. He is very good at framing damage as love." "I know," Harry said. "I'll be careful." She left. Harry looked at the window and felt the front moving through, rain coming in fast across the hills, and thought about the word love. About what it looked like when it was used as a justification and what it looked like when it was just true. The distance between those two things. At 4:47 Pomfrey appeared at the door of the supply room where she'd been taking inventory and said, in the tone of someone reporting a weather event, "The headmaster is on his way up." Harry was sitting cross-legged on his hospital bed with Frick's casting records, Hermione's restricted section notes, and McGonagall's letter of guardianship review arranged on the blanket in front of him like a brief. He straightened the papers. Looked up. "Thank you," he said. Dumbledore knocked before entering, which was interesting because he was the headmaster of the building and knocking was a choice rather than a necessity. He opened the door and came in and he was, Harry had to concede this, with the full objectivity of his newly unbound assessment, genuinely impressive. The presence of the man, the way the room organized itself around him, the way rooms organize around people who have held enormous authority for a very long time. The silver hair, the robes, the half-moon glasses, the quality of attention that suggested that whatever you were saying was the most important thing currently in the universe. Harry recognized it for what it was. A tool. A very refined one. "Harry," Dumbledore said warmly. "Headmaster," Harry said. "Sit down." Dumbledore's warmth didn't flicker. He took the chair and arranged himself in it with the ease of someone who is comfortable in every room they enter. "You've been making remarkable progress," he said. "Madame Pomfrey's reports have been, you've been monitoring the removals," Harry said. A pause. So brief that anyone without the full empathic range and strategic cognition simultaneously active would have missed it. "I am the headmaster," Dumbledore said. "A student's medical situation is, through the school's ambient monitoring system," Harry said. "Which tracks magical development in the student population. You set an alert on my core readings. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon glasses and Harry looked back and neither of them looked away for a moment. Then Dumbledore said, in a slightly different register, the warmth still there but with something more direct underneath it, yes. I did. Why? Harry said. Because I needed to know when you would be, he chose the next word with visible care. Ready for this conversation. And the 36th removal told you I was ready, Harry said. The 36th removal told me that you had access to your full cognitive range, Dumbledore said. Yes. I thought you deserved a conversation with someone in full possession of your own strategic capacity. I wanted that for you. Harry looked at him. Felt the layers of that, the genuine truth wrapped around the strategic calculation, the care that was real but was also a kind of positioning, the warmth of a man who had convinced himself that what he felt and what he did were the same thing. I received the guardianship filing notification, Dumbledore said, quietly. From the Wizengamot duty officer. At 4:32. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression did something complicated. Not hurt, more like recognition. The expression of a man watching something move that he'd set in motion and can no longer stop. You arranged that before I arrived, he said. I arranged it so that we could have this conversation as equals, Harry said. I didn't arrange it to punish you. I arranged it because you being my magical guardian while we discuss what you authorized to be done to me as my magical guardian was, not a conversation I was willing to have. Dumbledore was quiet. I have Frick's casting records, Harry said. He touched the documents on the blanket. All 48. His signatures, your instruction authorization, the 4B filing. I have Hermione's research notes on the Delta Protocol, Ministry Order 7R, subsection Delta. 12 children, between 79 and 82, that we know of. He paused. I have Neville Longbottom's diagnostic. I have my own. I have a healer willing to testify. I have a ministry official with oversight failures he'll be motivated to manage through cooperation rather than obstruction. He set his hands flat on the documents. What I don't have is a conversation with you. Which is what I actually want. Dumbledore looked at him across the small hospital wing distance and Harry held his gaze steadily and the room was very quiet. Ask, Dumbledore said. Why, Harry said. Not loudly. Just simply. I want the real answer. Not the answer about protection or the greater good or the projected developmental threat. I want the actual reason. What were you afraid of? Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The longest he'd been quiet. And Harry waited, because the strategic cognition knew how to wait, knew that silence applied to the right person at the right moment did more work than any question could. You were 18 months old, Dumbledore said finally, when Voldemort first tried to kill you. You are aware of this. He folded his hands. What you are not aware of, what almost no one is aware of, is what happened in the moments between Voldemort's curse and the outcome. There is a prophecy, Harry. About you and Voldemort. I will give you the full text when the time is right, give it to me now, Harry said. Because there are elements of it that require, give it to me now, Harry said again, in the same even tone. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the look was, Harry thought, almost relief. Like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and can feel the moment when someone is finally going to take the other end of it. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Dumbledore said quietly. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The hospital wing was very still. Harry processed the prophecy, all of it, simultaneously, with the full capacity of his unbound mind. Felt its weight, its inevitability, its specific cruelty. Let it land and settle. Looked at Dumbledore. You bound me, Harry said, because you were afraid of what I would do when I found out. Dumbledore's hands, folded in his lap, moved slightly. I was afraid, he said, carefully, of what Voldemort would do if he discovered that the child who defeated him was ungovernable, Harry said. The word landed exactly as he'd intended it to. Dumbledore's eyes closed briefly. When they opened they were doing something that Harry found, to his own mild surprise, genuinely moving. They were doing grief. Real grief, not performed, not strategic. The grief of a man who is looking at the cost of his own decisions and finding it larger than he's let himself see. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. That was the word used. In the documentation. I used it. You looked at a 2-year-old child, Harry said, and decided the safest thing, the most protective thing, was to make sure that child could never become what he was. I decided, Dumbledore said, that a child who did not know his own power could not be exploited through it. Could not be targeted for it. Could not be pulled toward paths that his power, unchecked, he stopped. Started differently. I made a decision, he said. I made it believing it was right. I have spent 10 years, some portion of those years, increasingly uncertain that it was. And the other portion? Harry said. Telling myself certainty, Dumbledore said. Harry held that. Felt the specific quality of it, not an excuse, not a justification, an accounting. Which was different. He'd expected justification. The accounting was harder to respond to. I'm angry, Harry said. I want you to know that. Not, he checked himself. Not in a way that's about destroying you. I'm angry in the way you're angry when someone you should have been able to trust made a decision about your life that they had no right to make, and they made it anyway, and you can see exactly how it happened but it doesn't make it right. He paused. It doesn't make it right. No, Dumbledore said. It doesn't. The Delta Protocol, Harry said. The 12 children. Are there others? Beyond 82? Dumbledore was quiet. Are there others? Harry said again. The formal program, what you're calling the Delta Protocol, ended in 82, Dumbledore said. I ended it. Because I had concluded by then that I had made an error of both ethics and judgment. He paused. Your case was, you were authorized separately, in 81, as an individual assessment. It was not part of the formal program, which had already wound down by then. So you ended the program, Harry said, and then applied it to me anyway. Dumbledore's hands were very still. Yes. Because the prophecy made me special, Harry said. Because the situation with me was different. The greater good, for this one specific child. He kept his voice even. That's how it works, isn't it? The program is wrong in general but for this one case, this one exception, the circumstances justify, yes, Dumbledore said. He said it like a man accepting a sentence. That is exactly how it works. I am aware of how it sounds. Are you aware of how it feels? Harry said. The question hung between them. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment and in his face, behind the silver and the gravitas and the considerable authority, there was something that was very simply human. A man who had done damage and was sitting across from the person he'd done it to and could not move the damage out of the space between them. No, he said. I don't think I fully understood, until this moment, how it feels. Harry breathed in. Breathed out. Let the anger be what it was and let it not be the only thing it was. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Dumbledore waited. The guardianship review will proceed, Harry said. McGonagall has agreed to be considered as replacement guardian, and I'll formally request her specifically. You will not contest this. He waited. Dumbledore nodded, once. The Ministry Archive investigation will proceed, Neville and I will file the formal complaint jointly. You will not obstruct it. When the investigation finds the Delta Protocol files and the 12 names, and it will, you will cooperate fully with the investigators. What you're describing, Dumbledore said carefully, may have significant implications for my position. The Waisengamot, the school, I know, Harry said. Those are your implications to manage. I'm not asking you to fall on a sword. I'm asking you to not stand in the way. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I'm also asking you, this is separate from the formal process, to tell me everything you know about Voldemort, the prophecy, and whatever you've been planning. All of it. Not in pieces, not when you decide I'm ready. Everything. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Harry held the quiet. You understand, Dumbledore said, that what I've been planning, the long game, as it were, was designed for a Harry Potter who didn't know he was playing. I know, Harry said. We'll have to redesign it. Something happened in Dumbledore's expression then that Harry hadn't expected, something that was almost, very quietly, a kind of hope. Old and cautious and slightly surprised by itself. You don't intend to simply dismantle everything I intend to survive, Harry said. I intend to end Voldemort. I intend to do both on my own terms, with full information, with the people I choose around me, in full possession of everything I am. He paused. That was always the goal, wasn't it? In your original design? Yes, Dumbledore said. Then the goal hasn't changed, Harry said. Only the design. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And then, slowly, without performance, he nodded. The nod of someone who has been outmaneuvered and knows it and has decided that the person who outmaneuvered them is, perhaps, the right person to be listening to. I'll tell you everything, he said. When would you like to start? Tomorrow, Harry said. After the morning removal session. Come at noon. I'll be here, Dumbledore said. He stood, and for a moment he just stood there, and then he said, for what it's worth, and I understand if the value is limited, I am sorry, Harry. Not for a reason. Not with a qualification. Simply sorry. Harry looked at him. Felt the truth of it, imperfect, insufficient, and true. I know, he said. I'll see you tomorrow. Dumbledore left. Harry sat in the quiet for a long time. Outside the window the Scottish hills were dark, the storm front having passed through and left the sky washed clean. Stars were coming out over the mountains, sharp and cold and entirely indifferent to everything that had just happened in the Hogwarts hospital wing. He felt Hermione before he heard her, the particular quality of her presence, already familiar, at the far end of the corridor, moving fast. She'd been waiting, he realized. Somewhere nearby. Not close enough to intrude, close enough to be there. The door opened. She came in, read the room in approximately 1 second, and sat down in the chair. She didn't ask how it went. She looked at him and then said, "Tea?" "Yes," Harry said. She produced a flask from her bag. Poured 2 cups. Handed him one. He drank it. It was very good tea, because Hermione approached tea with the same precise methodology she approached everything else and had apparently figured out a heating charm that maintained optimal temperature without impacting flavor. He agreed, she said. He agreed, Harry said. All of it? All of it. She nodded. Drank her tea. Neville said yes, by the way. To the joint complaint. He was extremely decisive about it. I thought he would be, Harry said. He also said, she paused. Something moved in her expression that was fond and slightly surprised. He said he'd been sitting on a bench outside the Gryffindor portrait for 3 days working up to asking you directly, and then you told him to come in and ask before he even knocked. I could hear him thinking, Harry said. Hermione shook her head, not in disbelief, just in the particular wonder of someone encountering something their models keep failing to fully contain. You're going to make the next 7 years very interesting, she said. Is that all right? Harry said. She looked at him. The ward was lit with candles and the stars were coming in hard through the windows and the tea was warm and everything that had been undone and rebuilt over the last 10 days sat between them like the foundation of something. Yes, Hermione said. That's very all right. Across the castle, in his office at the top of the highest tower, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk with the portraits of previous headmasters watching him and did not speak for a long time. Eventually Phineas Nigellus Black said, from his frame, "Well. You made a mess." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Are you going to fix it?" Dumbledore looked at the window. Thought about a boy sitting cross-legged on a hospital bed with documents arranged before him like a brief, holding the gaze of the most powerful wizard in Britain without looking away. "I think," he said slowly, "that it may already be getting fixed without me." He sounded, the portraits agreed among themselves, quietly and genuinely relieved. Chapter 5, The Weight of What You Owe. The attempt happened at 3 in the morning on a Thursday. Harry was awake, he'd been awake, because he was always awake at 3 in the morning lately, his mind running too fast for sleep to catch it easily. He was reading Dumbledore's preliminary notes on Voldemort's Horcrux theory, which Dumbledore had delivered at noon the previous day as promised, speaking with the measured honesty of someone paying a debt. The notes were dense and alarming, and Harry had read them 3 times already, making marginal notes in his own handwriting alongside Dumbledore's more elaborate script. He felt it before it touched him. It was subtle, professionally, deliberately subtle. A threading sensation at the edge of his magical awareness, like something being worked into a keyhole from the outside. Careful. Practiced. Done by someone who knew what they were doing and had done something similar before. It came from the left, the window side, and moved toward him with the patience of a slow tide. Harry set down the notes. He looked at the window. No one there. No face, no shape. Just the dark glass and the stars. Whatever was doing this was being done remotely, or through a medium he couldn't see, or by someone who had access to the room through a method he hadn't identified yet. He looked at the ceiling. The walls. The door. He could feel it now with more specificity, a binding structure, thin and new, being constructed around the edges of his core the way you'd build a frame. Not one of the original 48. Something new. Someone trying to add to the stack. He let it get close enough to taste, metaphorically, let it develop enough that its architecture was readable, and then he pushed. Not dramatically. Not a visible explosion of power or a sound or anything that would wake Pomfrey in the next room. Just a firm, even, outward pressure from the center of his core, the way you'd push open a door that's been closed against you, and the binding structure collapsed. It didn't just fail. It unraveled, which meant Harry felt it all the way back along whatever conduit it had been channeled through, felt the far end snap back like a whip. From somewhere, he couldn't determine the direction, there was a muffled sound. Something between a gasp and an oath. Then silence. Harry sat with his hands on the Horcrux notes and his heart entirely steady in thought, someone just found out. He reached over and lit the candle on his bedside table, not with his wand, just with a thought, because wandless fire had been easy since the 30-second removal, and picked up a quill. At the top of a new piece of parchment he wrote the time, the sensation, the direction he'd estimated, the architectural type of the attempted binding, and the backlash response, in the clear, precise notation he'd been developing for exactly this kind of record-keeping. He would show it to Snape in the morning. Then he went back to the Horcrux notes, because he was 3/4 of the way through them and the theory was fascinating in the specific way of fascinating things that are also deeply terrible. Snape arrived at 7 looking like a man who had not slept. Not in the obvious disheveled way, Snape's robes were always precise, his expression always controlled, but there was something around his eyes and something in the set of his jaw that Harry had come to read as the specific signature of a difficult night. He came in, set his materials down, looked at Harry's face, and said, "Tell me." Harry handed him the parchment. Snape read it. "Read it again." His expression, during the second reading, did something careful and controlled that Harry let sit without pressing. "Architectural type," Snape said. "You've described it as a reinforcement matrix, not a suppressor." "Different from the originals," Harry said. "The originals were behavioral suppressors, they modified specific functions. This was structural. It was trying to cap my output. Like a pressure valve. Someone trying to limit your raw power rather than your specific behaviors, Snape said. Which means whoever it was already knew the behavioral suppressors were gone, Harry said. They knew what they'd lost and were trying a different approach. He paused. The backlash reached them. I could feel it. Someone had a bad night. Snape set the parchment down on the supply table. He was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone organizing multiple things simultaneously and deciding which to address first. I sent Owl Post to my ministry contact 2 nights ago, he said. Regarding the 3 additional 4B names from Frick's records. The response I received last night, he reached into his robe and produced a folded piece of parchment. The contact was found at 9 o'clock yesterday evening in a state of significant distress. A memory modification had been attempted on them. It was incomplete, they retain most of their relevant knowledge, but the attempt was made. Harry took the parchment. Read it. Looked up. Someone is doing damage control. Aggressively, Snape said. Which means the formal complaint filing, yours and Neville's, submitted to the Wisengamot 2 days ago, has attracted attention faster than anticipated. From Crouch? Harry said. Unknown, Snape said. Possibly. Or from someone acting on Crouch's behalf, or from a third party we haven't fully mapped yet. The Delta Protocol had more stakeholders than Frick's records suggest. There were ministry officials, healers, Wisengamot members who were aware of it and chose to be aware quietly. A formal investigation threatens all of them. Harry thought about this for a moment. Thought about his ministry contact, whoever that was, some unnamed person who'd been trying to help and had been punished for it. Felt the specific anger of that, clean and functional. Can your contact still testify? With protection, yes, Snape said. Get them protection, Harry said. I'm in the process. Today, Harry said. Snape looked at him. Not a challenge, just holding the look until the pace registered. Today, he confirmed. And whoever tried to rebind me last night, Harry said. They're going to try again. Differently, because they'll know the reinforcement matrix didn't work. What's next up the chain of complexity? A core seal, Snape said. It's the most extreme form of magical binding, it requires direct proximity to the subject, multiple casters, significant preparation. It's also irreversible without the original casters present. He paused. It would require access to you that is substantially more involved than a remote working. So they'd need to get into the hospital wing, Harry said. Or they'd need to wait until you leave it, Snape said, with the specific emphasis of someone pointing at something. Harry looked at him. You think I should stay here? I think, Snape said carefully, that the hospital wing has a significant number of protective enchantments that Pomfrey has been quietly reinforcing since the first night you were here, that it has the distinct advantage of being a medical facility with its own monitoring systems, and that it is, among the options available to an 11-year-old who has 8 binding charms still on his core, among the more defensible positions. But I'm leaving today, Harry said. Snape was quiet. 8 charms remaining, Harry said. We're doing 6 today and 2 tomorrow. I am not spending another week in here while someone makes attempts on me and chases down people who are helping us. I need to be moving. He met Snape's eyes. I'm also not afraid of a core seal attempt, because anyone trying to perform a multicaster ritual in the corridors of Hogwarts while I'm paying attention is going to have a very educational experience. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Then he uncapped the first stabilizing potion. Eat your breakfast first, he said. I've already eaten, Harry said. The eggs? Yes, Harry said. Snape looked at the plate on the side table. The eggs were demonstrably finished. Something shifted in his expression that was briefly, entirely human. Drink this, he said, and handed over the potion. The morning's 6 removals were the fastest they'd done, not because Snape was rushing, but because the architecture at the top of the stack was simpler than the deep layer material, the maintenance castings having been added with less craft than the originals. And because Harry's core at this stage was accustomed to the process and cooperated with it in the specific way of someone who has learned to let a knot be worked loose rather than pulling against it. With each removal the room did things. The candles reorganized themselves into a different arrangement. The window developed frost and then let it go. The supply table's contents vibrated briefly. Pomfrey documented all of it without comment, because she'd been documenting all of it for 10 days and had presumably reached a functional relationship with the castle, doing unusual things whenever Harry got slightly more of himself back. By 11 o'clock, with 6 removals complete and 2 remaining, something had shifted substantially enough that Harry could feel it in the room's texture, not just his own enhanced perception, but the room itself, the castle, the way Hogwarts responded to magical presence. The school had its own awareness, diffuse and old, and Harry could feel it now the way he could feel the weather. It was paying attention to him in the specific way of something large and ancient that has noticed a signal it recognizes. He mentioned this to Snape. Snape said, without looking up from his notes, Hogwarts was built by 4 of the most powerful witches and wizards in British history. Its ambient awareness recognizes certain types of magical signatures. The founders were specific in their intentions. A pause. Gryffindor, in particular, was known for a highly distinctive magical profile. He looked up. I'm not implying anything. I'm noting a documented historical characteristic of the school's enchantments. You're implying something, Harry said. Snape returned to his notes. Drink the stabilizing potion. Harry drank the stabilizing potion. He was discharged from the hospital wing at noon. Pomfrey did it with the specific emotional neutrality of a professional whose investment in a patient has been significant enough that neutrality requires effort. She went through the standard post-treatment instructions with the precision of someone who knows they're talking to a person who will actually follow them, which was apparently a refreshing change. 2 removals remaining, she said. Tomorrow morning. You will come back for them. This is not optional, this is medical. I know, Harry said. You'll eat properly. Sleep properly. If you experience any unusual magical surging, I'll come straight here, Harry said. If anyone attempts another binding working on you, I'll come straight here after dealing with it, Harry said. Pomfrey looked at him. Decided that was probably the best outcome she was going to get. Tomorrow, she said. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, Harry confirmed. He picked up his bag. Hermione had packed it for him 2 days ago in the specific way of someone who has considered the optimal arrangement of items and implemented it, and walked out of the hospital wing. The corridor hit him differently than it had 10 days ago. More texture. More information. The stone walls were cool and old and had a quality he hadn't been able to access in the brief moments he'd been in corridors before, a depth, a history, something that was almost sound but wasn't. He stood in the corridor for a moment and just felt it. Felt the castle around him, enormous and awake, and felt where he was in it the way you feel your position in a building you know very well. Then he went to find Neville. He found him in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom, 2 minutes before the first afternoon class, looking at his hands with the expression of someone who has been doing this periodically all day and finding the results worth looking at. His 3 limiters had been removed 2 days ago, and Neville's experience of that had been quieter than Harry's, different architecture, different depths, but the cumulative effect was visible. He stood differently. Not dramatically, he was still Neville, still round-faced, still inclined toward the apologetic, but there was something underneath the default setting now that hadn't been there before. Something that had been finding its feet. You're out, Neville said, when he saw Harry. 2 still to go, tomorrow morning, Harry said. But yes. Neville looked at him for a moment. You look different, he said. Apparently I feel different too, Harry said. How are you? Neville considered the question with the care he gave most things. I levitated my chair this morning, he said. Without trying. I was thinking about breakfast and the chair just he gestured upward. I caught it before it hit the ceiling. My roommates were not fully informed about the situation and there was a brief period of concern. Harry smiled. How brief? Until Ron Weasley said, "Wicked," and then it was fine, Neville said. The classroom door opened and students started moving in, and they moved with them, and transfiguration happened. Harry sat next to Neville and McGonagall looked at Harry with the expression of someone whose relief is too large for her face to fully contain but who is making a professional effort, and then she said, crisply, "Mr. Potter. Since you've apparently covered the first 6 weeks of syllabus in a hospital bed, perhaps you'd care to demonstrate the match-to-needle transformation for Mr. Longbottom." Harry demonstrated it. The match was a needle before he'd quite finished the wand motion, which was technically imprecise but practically very effective. Neville's match turned into a needle that was slightly oversized and made of something that appeared to be pewter rather than steel. He looked at it. Then he looked at McGonagall with the expression of someone who has been told their whole life they can't do something and has just done it. McGonagall looked at Neville's oversized pewter needle for a moment. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said, in a voice that was doing something complicated and trying not to show it. Neville looked at Harry. Harry looked at Neville. Neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. After class Harry went to the library, because the library was where Hermione spent her afternoons between lessons and because he had questions that the Horcrux notes had generated that couldn't wait for tomorrow's meeting with Dumbledore. He found her at her usual table. She'd claimed a specific table near the window in the first week and it had become understood, in the specific way of social facts at schools, that it was hers, with 6 books open and a stack of notes that was impressive even by her standards. She looked up when he sat down. "You're out." "I'm out," he confirmed. "2 tomorrow." She studied him with the analytical precision she used for texts that mattered. "You're running something," she said. "That look you have. You're several steps ahead of where we were this morning." 3 ahead, Harry said. "Possibly 4. He reached into his bag and produced the Horcrux notes. "I need to think through something with you. And I need your reaction to be honest, not managed." "When is my reaction ever managed?" she said, which was fair. He spread the notes on the table. Pointed to the section on soul magic, on the specific mechanism by which a Horcrux was made. Hermione read it properly, with the quality of attention she gave texts that were being evaluated, not just absorbed, and by the time she finished her expression had done what it always did when she encountered something that was simultaneously compelling and horrifying, it went very still. "He split his soul," she said. "Multiple times." 7 is the implication, Harry said. "From the magical theory Dumbledore's working with." "That's not," she stopped. Checked herself. "That's theoretically possible, which is to say there's an alchemical and arithmetical framework that doesn't forbid it, but the practical implications for the person doing it are." She looked at the notes again. "The degradation. Each division makes the soul less coherent. Less anchored. Which is why he lost his form when the killing curse rebounded, because there wasn't enough coherence left to." She was working through it, assembling pieces, and Harry let her because watching Hermione Granger assemble pieces was one of the most efficient intellectual processes he'd encountered. "The Horcruxes would need to be destroyed," she said. "All of them. Before he could be permanently, before he could die." "Yes," Harry said. "Do we know what they are?" "Dumbledore has some theories," Harry said. "Objects of significance to Voldemort. Artifacts with historical weight. He mentioned a diary, destroyed, we think, though Dumbledore isn't certain how, and a ring that belonged to Voldemort's maternal family. Beyond that he's working from inference. Which means there are probably 5 more out there," Hermione said. "Unknown objects, unknown locations, with pieces of someone's soul in them." She looked up from the notes. "And you have a piece of his soul in you." The table was quiet. "The scar," Harry said. "Yes. Dumbledore believes so. He doesn't say it directly in the notes but the implication is clear," Hermione said. "It's very clear." She looked at him, and her face did the thing it did when the intellectual problem and the personal reality arrived at the same point, when she remembered that she was not reading about a stranger but about the boy across the table from her. Harry. I know, he said. Do you? She said. Because you're very calm about it. I've had the notes since yesterday noon, he said. I've had time to, that's not what I mean, she said. You're calm in a way that isn't just processing time. You're calm in the way you're always calm, which is, she paused, choosing words with more care than usual. I've watched you have this entire thing happen to you, 48 charms, 9 years of suppression, the prophecy, Dumbledore, a midnight attempt to rebind you, and you are never frightened. You are sometimes angry, which is appropriate, but you are never frightened. And I want to know if that's real or if the binding charms made you that way, and when they come all the way off, it's real, Harry said. He said it quietly, without defense. I've thought about this. The binding charms suppressed capability and instinct, they took things away. They didn't add things. The calm is mine. He looked at her. I think I was built this way. I think that's partly what alarmed everyone so much, a 2-year-old who was already, like this. Underneath. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. Harry said. Yes, she said. I wanted to check. Now I know. She turned back to the notes. So. The scar. The soul fragment. Dumbledore's theory presumably has implications for the end of this. For how Voldemort is ultimately killed, Harry said. Killed, she said. Yes. And those implications for you are unknown, Harry said. He either doesn't know or isn't saying yet. Given that we've established he was previously planning to manage the situation without telling me, I think it's some of both. He paused. Which is why I'm thinking about it now. So that when I do know, I've already done the thinking. Hermione looked at him. Something in her expression was, he could feel the full weight of it now, with the empathic range restored and extended, and it was a complicated thing. Something protective that was also sad, that was also the particular fierce quality of someone who has decided, in the way of absolute decisions, that something matters to them and they are not going to pretend it doesn't. We'll figure it out, she said. Yes, Harry said. We will. They went back to the notes. Around them the library filled and then started to thin as the afternoon moved toward dinner, and Harry worked through the Horcrux theory with Hermione annotating and questioning and occasionally going to get books that were relevant without being asked and returning with them and saying, page 47, or, chapter 12, the bit about soul anchoring, and Harry read the bits about soul anchoring and thought, and Hermione watched him think with the specific patience of someone who has learned that this particular thinking process is worth the time. It was Hermione who noticed Draco Malfoy. She did it with a slight change in posture, sitting up straighter, a fractional shift of attention, and Harry tracked the direction without looking directly. Malfoy was 2 tables over. He'd been there for about 40 minutes, ostensibly doing his own work, but his work was being done with a percentage of his attention that was clearly insufficient for the material, and the remainder was being distributed between staring at Harry when he thought no one was looking and then looking quickly away. Harry let it sit for 10 minutes. Watched Malfoy's pattern. The looking was not hostile, or rather, it contained some hostility because Malfoy's default toward Harry appeared to be competitive and Harry's existence was apparently challenging to his worldview in ways he was still processing. But underneath the hostility was something else. Something that had been there since the sorting night, Harry thought, since Malfoy had witnessed part of the hospital wing corridor exchange between McGonagall and Pomfrey, which Harry suspected he'd done deliberately. He picked up his things, said 2 minutes to Hermione, and walked to Malfoy's table. Malfoy looked up with the expression of someone caught doing something and immediately arranging their face to suggest they were absolutely not caught. Potter, he said. Harry sat down in the chair across from him. Malfoy looked at the chair, at Harry, at the chair again, with the expression of someone who has not invited this and is not sure how it happened. I need something from you, Harry said. I beg your pardon. Malfoy said. Information, Harry said. And in exchange I'll give you something you've been trying to figure out for the past week. Malfoy's eyes narrowed. Not unfriendly, calculating. He had a good mind, Harry could see it, quick and lateral, currently running underneath the performance of Malfoy are obvious. What makes you think I've been trying to figure out anything? Because you've been looking at me for 40 minutes, Harry said pleasantly. And before that you were in the hospital wing corridor on the third night, which you managed quite neatly for someone who supposedly had no reason to be there. He waited. Malfoy's jaw moved slightly. You're trying to understand the Delta Protocol, Harry said. Not because you're sympathetic, though you might be, I don't know you well enough yet, but because you're wondering if it applies to you. The calculating expression shifted. Just slightly. But Harry caught it, the way a question you've been afraid to ask lands differently when someone says it out loud. Does it? Malfoy said. His voice was controlled. His hands, on the table, were very flat. Apply to me. I don't know, Harry said honestly. I'm in the process of finding out who the 12 children in the protocol were. Frick worked on 3 of them, I have those names, but not the other 9. When I have all 12 I'll know. He paused. But what I can tell you is that the magical suppression of children who showed exceptional developmental profiles during the early 80s was systematic. It was organized. It wasn't personal. And the people who organized it were making decisions based on threat assessment and political expediency, not on the welfare of the children involved. He met Malfoy's eyes. I don't know what your father has told you about your magical development when you were young. I don't know if there's something in your history that feels limited, in a way that doesn't quite make sense. Malfoy was very still. If there is, Harry said, come to me when we have the full list of names. I'll tell you immediately. He paused. What I need from you is the social architecture of Slytherin House. Who is connected to Crouch, whose parents are in that circle, who would have a stake in keeping the investigation quiet? Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. The social architecture of Slytherin House was, Harry recognized, not something you handed to someone outside it. It was leverage, it was protection, it was the currency of the world Malfoy had grown up in. Giving it was a significant thing. Why would I do that? Malfoy said. Because the Delta Protocol is going to come out regardless, Harry said. The formal complaint is filed, the Wisengamot review is moving, the archive investigation is coming. When it does, when all 12 names are public, you want to already be on the right side of it. Not because of sentiment. Because of what the Malfoy name is worth when it's associated with either the cover-up or the exposure. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Harry let the quiet be what it was. Zabini's father, Malfoy said, finally. He worked with Crouch in the late 70s. He's gone now, died in 88, but Blaise would have documents, if his mother kept them, which she does, because Blaise's mother keeps everything. He paused. Parkinson's family are less useful, they're connected but peripheral. Crabbe and Goyle's fathers are, he considered. They do what they're told. Not useful for information but useful as indicators of where instructions are coming from. He looked at Harry directly. Not. Theodore Knott's father was a junior ministry official in Crouch's department during the relevant period. He's currently in communications with people who may be connected to the attempt on to the recent incidents. Harry noted all of this efficiently. Thank you, he said. Malfoy looked at him. You're not what I expected, he said. It came out slightly involuntary, like something thought rather than said. No one's told me what they expected, Harry said. I suspect the expectation was pretty far from what I actually am. Yes, Malfoy said. My father said, he stopped. Started differently. The stories about you. The boy who lived. The narrative. He said narrative with a particular precision that suggested he had grown up in a family that understood the construction of narratives and what they were for. It was very contained. Specific. Like someone had built it carefully. Someone had, Harry said. I'm the alternate version. Malfoy almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way there, but the architecture of it was visible. That's going to be extremely inconvenient for a lot of people, he said. I know, Harry said. I'm looking forward to it. He stood. I'll tell you about the list when I have it. He went back to Hermione, who was watching with barely concealed interest. Well, she said. Not's father, Harry said, sitting down. Look into him. And see if you can find anything about Blaise Zabini's family that's publicly accessible, property records, ministry employment history from the late 70s. She was already writing. The attempt last night, she said, without looking up. You think it's connected to Not? I think it's connected to someone who received information about the formal complaint filing and moved very quickly, Harry said. Not's father is a potential conduit. Malfoy thinks he's in contact with people who'd have reason to stop the investigation. Which means he could be in contact with whoever tried to rebind you, Hermione said. Which means he needs to not be in a position to try again, Harry said. Or to interfere with anything else we're building. Hermione put down her quill. Looked at him. You want to neutralize him. I want information that makes neutralization unnecessary, Harry said. If he's connected to the attempt on Snape's contact, that's already a criminal matter. Memory modification is a serious offense. If we can document the connection, he can be arrested before he does anything else, Hermione said. She paused. That's actually quite elegant. Is it elegant? Harry said. You're using the legal system to remove a threat before it becomes a larger threat, which eliminates the need for anything messier, Hermione said. In the context of what you're dealing with, yes, I think that qualifies. Harry looked at the window. Evening was coming in, turning the library gold. Other students were packing up around them, voices picking up, the comfortable noise of a school in transition between activities. Dinner, he said. I'm going to the Great Hall. Hermione looked up sharply. You haven't been to the Great Hall since the sorting, Harry said. I'm aware. You'll walk in and 600 students will, yes, Harry said. I know. She looked at him. Something in her expression assessed him the way she assessed complex things, checking whether all the pieces were in the right configuration. Then she closed her books, stacked them with practiced efficiency, and said, I'll walk with you. He looked at her. Felt the full weight of the offer, the deliberateness of it, what it meant in terms of choosing to be visibly alongside him when being visibly alongside him was going to attract a significant quantity of attention. You don't have to, he said. I'm aware, she said, precisely echoing his own phrasing back at him. They walked to the Great Hall together. The effect when they entered was exactly what Harry had predicted and Hermione had flagged, and neither of them had tried to mitigate, because mitigation wasn't the point. The noise dipped, not dramatically, not all at once, but a ripple of quiet that moved out from the doors and came back as a different noise, the specific quality of 600 people simultaneously registering something and reacting to it. Heads turned. Voices changed register. The Slytherin table, Harry noted without looking directly, had a specific texture of attention that was calculating rather than purely surprised. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table. Sat down next to Neville, who had saved a seat with the ease of someone who had decided this was his job and was comfortable with it. Hermione sat on Harry's other side. Ron Weasley, across the table, said, All right, Harry, in the tone of someone trying to be normal about something that was not normal and doing a decent job of it. All right, Harry said. Food appeared. Harry ate. The Great Hall gradually returned to its usual noise levels, not entirely, there was still a quality of lateral attention from most of the room, but enough that dinner was dinner rather than an event. Neville said, quietly, between courses, Seamus Finnegan asked me this morning if you were going to be different. When you came back. What did you tell him? Harry said. I told him you were the same person, Neville said. Just more of it. Harry thought about that. Thought it was probably the most accurate single description he'd heard. That's right, he said. He seemed relieved, Neville said. I think people are, there are a lot of stories about you. About who you are. I think people are trying to figure out if the stories still apply. Some of them never did, Harry said. I know, Neville said. I told him that too. He was quiet for a moment. My gran old this morning. She wanted me to know she was, he stopped. Found the right word carefully. Sorry. She said she was sorry. She didn't explain it more than that, and she's not, my gran doesn't apologize easily. But she said it. Harry thought about a woman throwing her grandson off a pier to see if he'd do magic on the way down, and then sending an apology via owl when she finally understood what else she'd done. How did that feel, he said. Strange, Neville said. Good, I think, underneath the strange. He looked at his hands on the table. I'm different since the removal. I can feel it. It's like, have you ever been in a room where the light was slightly wrong, slightly dim, and you didn't know until someone opened a window? Yes, Harry said. Exactly like that. After dinner Harry found a quiet alcove off the second-floor corridor, the kind of small hidden space that Hogwarts was made of, as though the castle provided them deliberately for conversations that needed walls. He'd known it was there without having consciously noticed it, which he attributed to the castle's ambient awareness having a social dimension he hadn't expected. He sent a Patronus, a practice he'd been doing in the hospital wing since Charm 38, because the charm that had been suppressing his ability to produce a corporeal Patronus had come off as part of a cluster and the Patronus had immediately appeared, silver and clear and in the form of a stag that Harry had looked at for a full minute with something that was grief and recognition simultaneously. He sent the stag to Snape with the message he'd been composing since Malfoy's information. Snape appeared 7 minutes later, which was fast enough to confirm he'd been waiting for something of this sort. He listened to Harry's account of Malfoy's information, his theory about the connection to the memory modification attempt on the Ministry contact, without interrupting. When Harry finished Snape said, Theo Nott's father. Erasmus Nott. He was formally cleared of Death Eater charges in 82, claimed Imperius. He was not, in my assessment, under Imperius at any relevant point. He paused. He is also, as of last month, on the Wisengamot Review Committee that oversees the Department of Magical Law. Harry looked at him. Which is the department that houses Crouch's archive? And which will have oversight of any investigation opened by your formal complaint, Snape said. He's on the committee that reviews the investigation into the thing he's connected to, Harry said. Yes, Snape said. That needs to be filed as a conflict of interest before the investigation formally opens, Harry said. If it's filed before the committee convenes, he can't sit on the review without a formal challenge, and a formal challenge, given the circumstances, will succeed. A conflict filing requires documentary evidence of the connection, Snape said. Which we are currently building. How quickly? Harry said. 48 hours, Snape said. If my contact can provide the documentation they retained before the memory modification attempt. I've arranged the protective custody, they're being moved tonight. Harry nodded. Tonight is important, he said. If Nott is connected to the attempt on me last night, he'll try again. Possibly tonight, possibly differently. The protective custody moving will signal that the situation is shifting and he may accelerate. Yes, Snape said. He held Harry's gaze. Which is why you need to have some of those protections active yourself. I can handle, I'm not questioning what you can handle, Snape said, with a precision that was not debate. I'm pointing out that there is a difference between being capable of defending yourself against a magical attack and having those defenses active without requiring conscious effort. The difference being that a sleeping person cannot consciously defend themselves regardless of their capability. Harry paused. I can add a passive ward to your dormitory, Snape said. Tonight. Something that will alert you, and me, to any attempt. He paused. If you'll permit it. Harry noted the phrasing. Permit it. The deliberate deference. Coming from Snape, who did not defer as a default setting, it meant something specific. It meant he understood the weight of asking someone who just had 46 charms removed to allow another working to be placed on them, even a protective one, and was treating the asking accordingly. Yes, Harry said. Thank you. Don't thank me, Snape said. He stopped. Started again. It's the least I can do. Given what I should have noticed years ago. You didn't know, Harry said. I should have looked, Snape said. It came out rough, with the specific texture of McGonagall's I should have questioned more carefully from 10 days ago. The sound of a person applying a standard to themselves that they apply precisely because the alternative is to apply it less. Your mother would have, he stopped. She'd have been furious, Harry said. Yes, Snape said. Legendarily so. Good, Harry said. Then the fury lives in the right places. Snape looked at him for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, she would have liked who you are. Very much. Harry held that. Held it carefully and fully and let it matter. Go add the ward, he said. Snape left. Harry stood in the alcove for a moment, in the dark and the quiet, with the castle breathing around him and 2 charms still on his core and the stars coming in through a narrow window at the end of the passage. He thought about Neville saying just more of it. He thought about Hermione walking into the great hall beside him like it was obvious. He thought about Snape saying she would have liked who you are. He thought about 46 removals and 2 to go, and what waited on the other side of the last one, and whether the person on the other side would surprise him or whether he already knew. He thought he already knew. He went to Gryffindor Tower through corridors that parted for him the way corridors do when you move through them like you belong, not entitled, just present, and the fat lady opened before he said the password because apparently she'd already decided he didn't need to say it, which was either a castle thing or a fat lady thing, and either way he appreciated it. The common room was warm and full of first years doing homework with the specific stress of people who have been in school for 10 days and are already behind on everything. Ron Weasley was arguing with his chess set. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas were attempting something with Charms theory that was slightly on fire. 2 of the Weasley twins, Harry had been introduced, Fred and George, who appeared to be a single unit with 2 sets of limbs, were in the corner with parchment and the absorbed expressions of people planning something complex. Harry sat in a chair by the fire that had also apparently become understood to be his, despite him having spent 10 days in the hospital wing, and did the Horcrux theory equations until midnight. Then he went to bed. The ward Snape had placed was faintly visible to him at the threshold of the dormitory, a delicate, precise working, almost invisible, the kind of thing you'd miss entirely without the perceptive range Harry currently operated at. It had Snape's specific signature, exacting, layered, considerably more complex than it needed to be because Snape was not the kind of person who did things at the minimum required standard. Harry touched the ward as he crossed the threshold. Not activating it, just acknowledging it. The way you acknowledge something that was put there for your sake. He lay down. Ron's snoring was already a steady presence in the room. Neville, in the bed across from him, was deeply asleep, one hand flat on the mattress in the particular position of someone whose relationship with sleep has recently improved. Harry closed his eyes. He slept. Properly, fully, for hours becoming 6, and the ward held all night without a single alert, which meant either no one tried or someone had found out the ward was there and decided the evening's attempt was a loss. Either way, Harry slept. He was, he thought, in the brief moment before sleep took him completely, going to be all right. Not eventually, not after everything resolved, not at the end of the story. Now. Already. He was already all right. Chapter 6, Sorted. At last the last 2 charms came off on a Friday morning at 7:43, and the 48th, the oldest, the deepest, the one that had been there since Harry was 26 months old and that Frick had called in his notes the foundational suppressor, the charm he'd cast first, the one every other charm had been built on top of, came off like a door being opened from the inside. The hospital wing went quiet. Not the absence of noise quiet. The specific quality of quiet that exists when something very large has just finished moving and the air is still settling around where it was. Harry sat on the edge of the bed with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes open and looked at the wall and felt himself. Not introspectively. Not in the searching, uncertain way of someone looking for something they're not sure is there. He felt himself the way you feel the ground under your feet, immediate, solid, obvious. This is what he was. This had always been what he was. The 48 charms had been a house built around him and now the house was gone and there was just, him. Open air. The full horizon of what he contained. It was not overwhelming. It was, in fact, the opposite of overwhelming. It was the most naturally comfortable thing he'd ever felt, which said something very specific about the previous 11 years. Snape was at the window, back to the room, breathing carefully. Pomfrey was looking at the monitoring diagnostic that had been running continuously for 2 weeks and was now showing readings she'd presumably been theorizing about since the first day but had never seen confirmed in a living patient. She made a small sound, professional, contained, and wrote something down. Frick was in the corner, where he'd been for every session, documenting. He'd brought his full casting record each morning and cross-referenced every removal against his original notes, and Harry had watched him over 2 weeks move through the specific emotional geography of someone paying a debt they can't fully clear but are absolutely committed to paying as much of as possible. This morning he'd come in early and hadn't said anything to anyone and had stood in the corner with his records and his quill and had watched the last 2 removals with the expression of a man watching the full consequence of his own choices land somewhere real. Harry, Pomfrey said, in her professional voice, which she used as a vehicle for things she didn't say with her actual voice. How do you feel? Harry considered the question properly. It deserved a proper answer. Like the first breath after being underwater for 11 years, he said. Exactly like that. Pomfrey wrote that down, which Harry found slightly funny and decided not to say. Snape turned around. He looked at Harry with the full weight of whatever he'd been managing at the window and then he said, with a precision that stripped the statement of anything performative and left only the truth of it, your mother's eyes. Harry held his gaze. I know. She'd have been, Snape stopped. Chose differently. She was always right, he said. About what you were going to be. She knew. Harry said. She told me, Snape said. Before you were born. She said, whatever happens, Sev, he's going to be something entirely his own. Don't let anyone tell him otherwise. He paused. She said it like a warning. Like she was anticipating resistance. She was, Harry said. Turns out. The moment held itself. Then Snape said, briskly, reaching for his bag, the 48th removal has cleared the diagnostic. I'll send Dumbledore confirmation. A pause. And the other thing. The other thing being, Harry knew, the Sorting Hat standing request. It had come through McGonagall, 2 days after the original sorting night, a formal note, which was apparently a thing the Hat could produce when it felt strongly enough about something, written in an ink that appeared to be very old and slightly self-important, requesting that when Harry Potter's diagnostic was complete and his core was fully accessible, it would appreciate the opportunity to complete its original function. The Hat had been waiting. Harry dressed, ate the breakfast Pomfrey insisted on with the thoroughness of someone who intended to be argued with and was prepared for it, and then walked out of the hospital wing for the second time, and this time felt the castle completely differently than he had 2 days ago, which had been different from 10 days before that. Like hearing a song you've been listening to with one ear now in full stereo. The castle knew him. He was certain of that now, not anthropomorphically, not in a way that was precious or sentimental, but in the specific way of a place that had absorbed the magical signatures of its inhabitants for 1,000 years and recognized a frequency it had been waiting for. The stairs didn't shift under him. The portraits watched him with a quality of attention that was distinct from how they watched other students. The walls had a warmth when he put his hand on the stone, brief and unmistakable. He went to McGonagall's office first, because she'd asked him to come before the hat ceremony, and he found her behind her desk with paperwork and an expression that was doing its complex thing at high intensity. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She looked at him for a moment. "Then, the Wisengamot review of your guardianship was confirmed this morning. I am now your formal magical guardian, effective immediately." She slid a document across the desk. "You should have a copy." Harry picked it up. "Read it." "Set it back down." "Thank you," he said. "The formal complaint investigation," she continued, "opened yesterday. Crouch has been formally notified. Knott's conflict of interest filing was submitted yesterday afternoon by the legal representative I contacted. He is removed from the review committee." She paused. Erasmus Knott was questioned by Aurors this morning in connection with the memory modification attempt on Professor Snape's contact. He has been cooperative, in the specific way of someone who realizes cooperation is the most personally advantageous position available to him. "And Crouch?" Harry said. "Managing," McGonagall said drily. "In the way of career bureaucrats who have spent 30 years managing things. He will not, I think, be able to manage this one to his satisfaction." She set her hands flat on the desk. "The other names, the 12 from the Delta Protocol. 7 have been identified from the archive documents the investigation accessed yesterday morning. 7 names, 7 cases, some of them," she stopped. "Some of them in worse condition than yours. One of them is currently a healer at St. Mungo's. One of them is an Auror. Several are in circumstances that suggest the suppression significantly altered the trajectory of their lives in ways that," she stopped again. "I'll want those names," Harry said. "When the people involved have been contacted. Not before, they deserve to know before someone they've never met knows." McGonagall looked at him. "The investigative team will be making contact," she said. "I suggested that it might mean something, coming from you specifically. But I didn't commit to anything without your agreement." "I'll write to them," Harry said. "When they've been contacted. I'll write." He paused. "Neville should write too. It should come from someone who understands what it was like, not just from an investigative official." She nodded. Looked at him for another moment. "The hat is ready," she said. "Whenever you are." "Now," Harry said. "Let's do it now." She stood. Harry stood. And as he moved toward the door she said, without turning around, "I should tell you that in 40 years of teaching at this school I have had perhaps 3 or 4 students who I thought were entirely remarkable. Not talented, not clever, not gifted in the specific ways that get noted in records and referenced in recommendations." She paused at the door. "I mean remarkable. People who bend the shape of what's around them without trying to." She opened the door. "I thought you should know where you stand." Harry thought about what to say. Then he said, "You're one of the best people I've met." She made a sound that suggested this was the specific type of compliment she was least equipped to handle gracefully. "Come along," she said, and led him out into the corridor. The great hall had been set for it. Not officially, there was no feast, no first years in a nervous line, no teachers at the long table in formal arrangement. But the word had moved through the castle the way words move through schools, which is faster than any other medium, and by the time Harry walked through the doors behind McGonagall there were students filling the benches, not all 600, but enough, a critical mass drawn by the specific gravity of something being completed that everyone understood was significant. Hermione was in the front of the Gryffindor section. She'd saved a space beside her that she was currently defending with the specific posture of someone who will not be moved by suggestion, implication, or direct appeal. Neville was on her other side, sitting with the easy uprightness of someone who has recently acquired approximately a third more of themselves than they previously had access to. Ron Weasley was there, leaning forward already. The Weasley twins were in the row behind, showing none of their usual irreverence. They were watching with the quality of people who understand that certain things are outside the jurisdiction of a joke. Seamus and Dean. All of Gryffindor, Harry thought, looking at the bench. And significantly more than just Gryffindor, he could see students from every house, the sorting of their robes making a particular patchwork of the gallery. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was sitting in the middle of his housemates with the studied neutrality of someone who has decided their position on something and is not yet ready to announce it publicly. But he was there. That said something. The stool was in the center of the hall, exactly where it had been on the sorting night. The three-legged stool, battered and patient, waiting. The hat sat on top of it with the specific stillness of something that has been waiting for 2 weeks and is in no particular hurry now that the moment has arrived, because a hat that has been sorting children for 1,000 years has a relationship with time that's different from everyone else's. McGonagall didn't make a speech. She simply said, to the room, "The sorting will now be completed," and stood to the side. Harry walked to the stool. He could feel the hall, all of it, every person in it, the specific texture of their collective attention. Could feel the castle around that. Could feel his own magic, present and steady and entirely his, at full depth for the first time. He sat on the stool. He put the hat on his head. The brim came down over his eyes, going dark, and then the voice came, and it sounded different from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago it had sounded alarmed. Now it sounded like someone sitting down to a conversation they've been looking forward to. "There you are," it said. "Here I am," Harry thought back. "I've been waiting," the hat said. "I need you to know, in 1,000 years of sorting, I have never refused. Never had cause to. What I found in you 2 weeks ago was," a pause. "Something that might have been a sigh, if hats could sigh. Extraordinary, in the specific sense of being entirely outside ordinary. I was alarmed. I want to be honest about that. You were right to refuse," Harry thought. "What you did, announcing it, publicly, that started all of this." "I know," the hat said. "I made that calculation. I'm an old hat and I've made a lot of calculations over the years and I thought, this boy deserves to know what's been done to him. And the people in this room deserve to understand why I'm stopping. I could have simply told Dumbledore privately. I chose not to. Some decisions require witnesses." Why? Harry thought. Why did it matter that there were witnesses? The hat was quiet for a moment. "Because powerful men in private rooms have spent 1,000 years making decisions about people like you," it said. "And witnesses are the only reliable mechanism for making those decisions, and their consequences, real to the people who made them." Harry felt the truth of that settle into him. "What did you see?" he thought. 2 weeks ago. "What made you refuse?" "What I always see," the hat said. "You. All of you. Except, there were 48 layers over everything I was trying to see, which meant I was reading 48 versions of a person who'd been constructed to be manageable rather than the person who was underneath all of them. And the person underneath," the hat paused. "The person underneath was so much more than the constructed versions that I thought, if I sort the constructed Harry Potter, I sort the wrong person. And the sorting has to mean something or it means nothing. What do you see now?" Harry thought. The hat took its time. It was not the searching, struggling time of 2 weeks ago, not the time of something trying to work through obstruction. It was the time of something reading carefully, with full access, taking the measure of what it had been given. "Intelligence," the hat said. "Considerable. The strategic and analytical capacity has already been noted by several of your teachers. I'm getting a clear read on how it operates, which is simultaneously and laterally, holding multiple tracks at once without losing depth on any of them. That's rare. That's very rare. And?" Harry thought. "Loyalty," the hat said, and said it with a weight that was different from the abstract how-straight version of the word. Not the loyalty of habit or proximity or convenience. The loyalty that comes from a person who has decided, with full clarity and full awareness, that certain people matter and certain principles matter and they are not available for compromise on either. That's a different thing. That's a much more powerful thing. What else? Harry thought. Courage, the hat said simply. Though I think you'd reject that word. I don't feel courageous, Harry thought. I just don't feel afraid. That's what courage looks like from the inside, the hat said. Everyone on the outside feels brave. On the inside it always feels like just doing what seems obvious. You feel it. You simply act. The fear doesn't land. That's not the absence of courage, that is courage, at its most fundamental. And the cunning? Harry thought. Because I know it's there. Oh yes, the hat said, with something that was warmth and something that was satisfaction in equal measure. It's very much there. Malfoy, yesterday evening. The formal complaint sequencing. The guardianship filing timed for Dumbledore's arrival. The Horcrux theory working you've been doing. The information network you've been quietly building across all 4 houses. A pause. You'd make an exceptional Slytherin. I know, Harry thought. But you won't be, the hat said. Because Slytherin would give you peers who match your cunning without matching your loyalty, and you need both in equal measure around you. You've already found them, the girl who reads everything and the boy who is braver than he knows. They're yours. And they're not Slytherins. They're Gryffindors, Harry thought. They're yours, the hat said again. Which is the better category? Harry sat with that. The hall was very quiet around him, he could feel it, the held breath of the room, all those people waiting to hear what the hat had spent 2 weeks working toward. Tell me about the prophecy, Harry thought. You must know about it. You sort students based on what they are and who they'll become, you must have some sense of, I know about the prophecy, the hat said. I've known about it since the night Dumbledore told me what to watch for in a child with Harry Potter's magical signature. Which was, incidentally, the night I understood that he was planning to manage you. I didn't know the mechanism. I didn't know about the binding charms until I found them myself. A pause. I want you to understand something about the prophecy. Tell me, Harry thought. It describes what will happen, the hat said. It does not describe who you have to be while it's happening. Prophecies are, they're very specific about events and very vague about people. Power the Dark Lord knows not is not a description of a power. It's a description of a gap in someone else's understanding. Another pause. Voldemort doesn't understand loyalty. He doesn't understand the kind of love that makes decisions permanent. He doesn't understand someone who cannot be purchased or threatened or diminished into compliance. The hat was quiet for a moment. He spent 30 years being afraid of a 2-year-old child and had no idea what he was actually afraid of. And now? Harry thought. Now the child is 11, the hat said. And fully himself. And that is considerably more alarming for anyone who was invested in the previous arrangement. Harry felt something move through him, not pride, not quite, but something adjacent that had more gravity than pride. A sense of his own weight in the world. The specific knowledge of what it means to be, entirely and finally, oneself. Sort me, he thought. With pleasure, the hat said. And then it shouted, in a voice that filled the great hall from stone floor to enchanted ceiling, Gryffindor. The noise that came back was not the polite applause of a standard sorting. It was the sound of something that had been building for 2 weeks finally arriving, a wave that started at the Gryffindor table and spread outward and bounced back from the walls and came back doubled, and in it Harry could hear, if he was paying attention, and he was always paying attention, the specific frequency of something being set right. Not celebrated, not performed. Set right. He took the hat off his head. The hall came back, gold and alive and full of sound, and Harry sat on the stool for one more moment and looked at it. Looked at Hermione, who was clapping and not bothering to manage the expression on her face, which was doing about 7 things simultaneously, all of them genuine. Looked at Neville, who was on his feet without having decided to stand, clapping with his whole body in the way of someone who feels things completely. Looked at Ron Weasley, who was shouting something that got lost in the general noise but whose face said everything his words couldn't carry. Looked at McGonagall, standing at the side of the hall, who had composed her face into its professional arrangement, and whose eyes were doing everything the rest of her face wouldn't. Looked at Dumbledore, at the teacher's table, and this was the most interesting look, because Dumbledore was doing something Harry hadn't seen him do in any of their interactions. He was not performing anything. His face had no current strategy running across it, no pleasant expression being deployed as a tool. He was just an old man watching a boy who should have had this 2 weeks ago finally have it, and in his face was something that was equal parts guilt and genuine relief, and a quality Harry thought was hope. For the future, maybe. For his own better possibilities. For the shape of a story that was still being written. Harry stood up. He carried the hat to McGonagall, who took it from him. Their hands brushed. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He walked to the Gryffindor table. He sat down between Hermione and Neville immediately clapped him on the back in a way that would have seemed presumptuous 2 weeks ago and felt entirely right now, and Ron leaned across the table and said, "Took long enough," in the tone of someone making a joke that contains a real feeling, and Harry laughed. Not politely. Not managed. Actually laughed, with his whole chest, and it felt like the 48th charm coming off, except this time there was nothing underneath it but air. The hat, back on its stool, made a sound. Not sorting someone, just a sound. A satisfied, ancient, entirely self-congratulatory sound. The hall gradually settled into its usual noise, the post-event rustling and talking and the particular social energy of 600 people having witnessed something and now processing it in real time. Harry let the noise wash around him and didn't try to monitor all of it, just sat in the center of it and was there. Hermione said, quietly, leaning toward him, "Told you." "You didn't tell me anything," Harry said. "You said, 'I'll walk with you.' That's not a prediction." "It was implied," she said. "It was not implied," Harry said. "It was heavily implied," she said, and this was, Harry thought, going to be a recurring feature of knowing Hermione Granger. She was very rarely wrong and occasionally knew it just slightly too much, and he found he didn't mind that at all. "Fine," he said. "It was implied." She looked satisfied. The morning moved forward. Classes happened. Harry attended them for the first time in 2 weeks, and the experience of being in a classroom at full capacity was, to put it plainly, extraordinary in the way of things that would seem immodest to describe and were true regardless. Flitwick made a sound when Harry levitated not just the feather but every object on his side of the table simultaneously and in precise geometric arrangement, which had been an accident, and then spent the remainder of the class period with the expression of a small man having a very large day. Quirrell's defense class was more interesting for different reasons. Harry had been thinking about Quirrell since McGonagall's first reference to him, a brief pause, a quality of attention that suggested information she'd chosen not to share. He'd done research and the research had produced a portrait, a professor who'd taken a year abroad and returned changed in ways that were explained as academic trauma and didn't quite fit. Who flinched away from certain topics with a precision that suggested the flinching was practiced. Who wore a turban that he said was a gift and which had, to Harry's extended senses, a quality that was wrong, in a way he didn't fully have vocabulary for yet. He sat in the front of Quirrell's class, which Quirrell did not like. He could feel that, Quirrell's discomfort at Harry's proximity, his eyes not landing on Harry directly, the way the air around the turban did something that Harry's environmental attunement registered as a temperature discrepancy that had nothing to do with the room. He said nothing about any of this. He filed it carefully and thoroughly and thought about it that evening with Hermione in the library, and Hermione's expression when he described the temperature discrepancy went through 3 separate stages: disbelief, consideration, and then the specific quality of someone whose pattern recognition has just completed a very alarming circuit. "You think he's compromised," she said. "I think something about Quirrell is not what it appears to be," Harry said. "I don't have enough information to be specific yet. But the turban is, there's something in the turban. Or under it. Something, Hermione said. Something with a magical signature I haven't encountered anywhere else in the castle, Harry said. Which is interesting given that I can currently feel the magical signatures of essentially everything in the castle. He paused. Except that one. Hermione looked at the table for a moment. Voldemort's soul is fragmented, she said carefully. You described the Horcrux theory, the soul splitting, yes, Harry said. If a fragment of soul can exist in an object, she said, then theoretically, Harry said, it could also exist in a person. They looked at each other across the library table. That's where he's been, Hermione said. That's how he's been surviving. Not in an object. In a person. In Quirrell. Using Quirrell, Harry said. The way the Horcrux theory describes, the soul fragment doesn't cooperate. It inhabits. It uses what it inhabits without the inhabitant having chosen it. He thought about Quirrell's nervous performance, the stutter, the flinching. The specific quality of a man who has lost significant territory inside himself. Quirrell may not be fully aware of the extent of it. We need to tell Dumbledore, Hermione said. I've been thinking about that, Harry said. Yes, we tell Dumbledore. But we also need to understand what Voldemort wants with Quirrell here specifically. He's not here for the education. The Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said, immediately. Harry looked at her. I noticed the troll corridor on the 3rd floor, the one that's restricted, the one with the protection over the trapdoor. I've been doing research. The protections were added this summer. There's something down there that Dumbledore is keeping. She pulled a notebook. Fluffy is a 3-headed dog, Hagrid let the name slip when I asked him about it, and 3-headed dogs are a traditional guardian creature for objects of significant value. Below that there would be additional protections. The Philosopher's Stone, it was moved from Gringotts this summer, there was a break-in, Vault 713, you've been researching all of this for how long? Harry said. Since the 2nd day, Hermione said, without embarrassment. While I was waiting for visiting hours. Harry looked at his friend, this extraordinary, fierce, methodical person who had been quietly building parallel intelligence operations from the Gryffindor common room while he was having his binding charms removed, and felt the full weight of his appreciation for her, which was considerable and getting larger. We go to Dumbledore tonight, he said. Both of us. With all of this. I'll send him a note, Hermione started. I'll tell the Patronus, Harry said. She watched him cast it, the stag, silver and clear, moving through the library with the specific grace of something that existed entirely at Harry's direction. She watched it go with an expression that was doing its 7 simultaneous things routine, and one of the 7 things was wonder, which Harry thought she probably didn't show many people and which he was glad she didn't hide from him. Dumbledore met them in his office at 7 o'clock, and he listened to everything. Harry led the telling and Hermione supplemented with documentation and cross-references and the occasional piece of evidence from her notebook, and Dumbledore sat in his chair and listened with the quality of attention that was one of his genuine gifts, undimmed by anything that had passed between them, and when they finished he was quiet for a long moment. Quirrell, he said. Yes, Harry said. I had suspicions, Dumbledore said. I could not confirm them. The signature you describe, the temperature discrepancy, the magical frequency, he looked at Harry steadily. You can sense it at classroom distance? Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore breathed. Set his hands flat on his desk. I need to think carefully about how to proceed. Quirinus Quirrell is, as you noted, likely not fully complicit in what he's carrying. Removing Voldemort from him cannot be done in a way that harms Quirrell, Harry said. More than he's already been harmed, Dumbledore said. Yes. He looked at Harry and Hermione. This is very good work. Both of you. He said it without the performance of pleasantry. Just plainly. I will take this forward. I need you to, we need to be part of the forward, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "I'm not being managed," Harry said. "Not aggressively. Just as a fact, stated once, that didn't need elaboration. We brought this to you because you have resources we don't and because this is your school. But we're part of this." Hermione identified the stone's location. I identified Quirrell. We're part of this. Dumbledore held his gaze. The old calculation ran briefly across his face and then he visibly let it go in the specific way of a person who has made a decision about who they're going to be going forward and is finding the practice of it easier than the theory. "You're part of this," he said. "Both of you." He paused. "And Neville Longbottom?" "He's part of it too," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded. "Then I'll need all three of you tomorrow morning. Early. In this office." He looked at Hermione. "Your notes on the stone's protections, may I see them?" Hermione passed the notebook. Dumbledore read it and something moved in his face that Harry thought was almost pride, not for himself, but the kind of pride that's directed outward, at something that has surpassed the expectations built around it. "Miss Granger," he said. "This is exceptional work." Hermione sat very straight and said, "Thank you, sir," and managed not to smile so hard that it was unprofessional, which was clearly an effort. They left the office at 8. In the corridor, walking back toward Gryffindor Tower, Hermione said, "He's going to act on Quirrell tonight." "Yes," Harry said. "He'll do a quiet assessment. He won't move on it fully without a plan but he'll want confirmation before morning." "And Voldemort," Hermione said. "If he's been here since the start of term, watching Harry, waiting for the stone, what does he know? About the investigation, about your charms being removed?" "He knows what Quirrell has been able to observe," Harry said. "Which is, not nothing. Quirrell teaches a class Harry attends. He's had access to ambient castle information. He thought. He knows the charms are gone. He doesn't know the full scope of what that means yet, which is why he hasn't moved on the stone yet. He's been assessing. He's afraid of you," Hermione said. "Not with satisfaction, just as an observation." "He doesn't know what I am yet," Harry said. "He's been afraid of what I might be for 10 years. Now he's trying to figure out if the reality matches the fear." "Does it?" Hermione said. Harry thought about the last 2 weeks. About everything that had been taken and everything that had been given back and everything he was now, standing in the Hogwarts corridor at 8 in the evening in his first year, with a prophecy in his memory and a soul fragment in his scar and a plan that was building itself with the organic, structural confidence of something that knows where it's going. "It exceeds it," he said. She nodded. They walked. Neville was in the common room when they got back, sitting in the chair he'd claimed with the ease of someone who has recently discovered they're allowed to claim things, doing herbology homework with a focus that was entirely new to him. He looked up when they came in and read Harry's expression in the way of someone who had learned over 2 weeks to read Harry's expressions, which was not easy but was, Neville had told Harry, more informative than most people's complete explanations. "Tomorrow morning," Neville said. "Dumbledore's office," Harry said. "Early." Neville closed his herbology textbook. "Right," he said. The single word, simple and immediate. No hesitation. Harry sat in the chair by the fire. The common room was doing its evening thing around him, homework, arguing, the twins constructing something they kept covering with parchment when teachers walked through the portrait hole. Ron Weasley was attempting, with Seamus Finnegan's assistance, to figure out a chess move that his own pieces were refusing to execute, which was apparently a feature of magical chess that Harry found slightly alarming. Everything was, exactly as it was. The ordinary machinery of a school evening. Except that Harry was sitting in the middle of it as himself, completely, for the first time, and the experience of ordinariness from that position was, he thought, probably the best thing he'd felt in the entire fortnight. He thought about tomorrow. About Quirrell and the stone and Voldemort, patient and afraid in someone else's body, watching Harry through someone else's eyes and trying to understand what he was dealing with. He thought about 12 children, 7 of them named now, living their lives with pieces of themselves missing and not knowing why. He thought about Snape, who had spent this morning standing at a window with his back to the room managing something large, and who would never be thanked fully enough for any of it, and who would bristle if someone tried, and who had told Harry what his mother said before he was born. He thought about McGonagall, who had looked at the diagnostic scroll on the hospital wing floor and gone grey, and who had filed the guardianship request and filed it correctly and never once asked whether he was sure. He thought about Frick, paying his debt methodically and thoroughly, because some debts are not fully payable and the only response to that is to pay what you can without stopping. He thought about Neville saying we were both being made small and what it meant to have said that out loud to another person and had it be true. He thought about Hermione finding him in the hospital wing on the first day, with the book and the directness and the question, "Does it bother you?" And saying it's yours the way someone says a thing that needed to be said and says it simply. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying she would have been right to warn them. He thought about his mother's eyes. His father's hair. A cottage that had been warm. 2 people who had loved each other and had a son and had died for something they believed in, and whose son was sitting in a Gryffindor common room on a Friday evening, fully himself, doing what needed to be done. He thought, I am going to finish this. For them, and for Neville, and for the 12, and for all the other children who get made small by powerful people who decide their power is frightening. I am going to finish this and I am going to do it as myself and I am not going to be afraid. He thought, it won't be this year. It won't even be soon. But it will happen. He was certain of this in the way he was certain of whether, instinctively, fully, in the body of the thing as well as the mind. The certainty of someone who has looked at a problem from every angle and understood that the problem is solvable and has begun solving it. Ron Weasley's chess set made an objectionable sound. Ron argued back at it. Neville's quill scratched steadily at his herbology notes. Hermione, in the chair across the fire, opened a book, then looked at Harry over the top of it. You're thinking about Voldemort, she said. Among other things, Harry said. What's the dominant thing, she said. Harry looked at the fire. That we've got time, he said. That's the thing no one ever seems to include in these situations. There's time. He's weak, he's hidden, he's operating through a compromised host and trying to steal something to restore himself. And we know all of that. He looked at Hermione. We have time to do this right. She looked at him for a moment. The firelight was warm on her face and she was holding her book closed now without having noticed she'd closed it. We have time, she agreed. Yes. Good, Harry said. He settled back in the chair. In that case, what are you reading? She looked at the cover. Ancient Runes. It's not on our course list yet, but the foundation theory is relevant to. Is it relevant to the stone's protections? Harry said. She paused. Possibly the second one, she said. There's a runic component to the Devil's Snare ward that I want to cross-reference, then I'll read it after you, Harry said. She handed it over immediately, which was how Harry knew she trusted him completely, because Hermione Granger handing over a book she was currently reading was not a small gesture. She pulled a different one from her bag and they sat by the fire in the warm noise of the common room and read, and the evening moved forward with the unhurried pace of people who have understood that urgency and recklessness are different things. At midnight, when the common room had emptied and the fire had banked itself to embers, Harry sat alone in the chair for a few minutes before bed. He put his hand on the armrest. Felt the warm stone of the castle underneath the wood and fabric in time. The castle breathed, he could feel it, that old enormous breathing, the slow pulse of a place that had held people for 1,000 years and would hold them for 1,000 more. He thought about the Sorting Hat's words, witnesses are the only reliable mechanism for making things real. The whole school had watched. Every student who'd been in the Great Hall that morning, 600 witnesses to a sorting that had taken 2 weeks and 48 charms and the deliberate, steady work of people who'd decided that what had been done was wrong and were not going to stop until it was right. Those 600 students would remember it. Would tell their children about the year the hat refused, the year Harry Potter sat in the hospital wing for 2 weeks and came out someone different, not different from who he'd been, but different from who he'd been made to be. The year the Delta Protocol came to light. The year someone filed a guardianship review on Albus Dumbledore and won. The year things started being done differently. Harry looked at the embers. They were very low, just the orange memory of fire. He thought about putting his hand out and coaxing them back but didn't, let them be what they were, late and peaceful and done. He went upstairs. He slept. In the morning there was breakfast, he ate it fully, including the eggs, because eating properly was one of the small daily choices that added up to a person, and then there was Dumbledore's office, and Hermione and Neville arriving at the same time without having coordinated it, which he thought was going to be a recurring feature of the three of them. And there was work to do. Considerable, complex, important work, Quirrell and the Stone and the 12 Names and the Horcrux theory and the Wisengamot and the slow, necessary process of dismantling things that should never have been built. But here was the thing about work, Harry had come to understand in 2 weeks of becoming himself, it was better when you were actually yourself while you did it. Not a managed version, not a constructed version, not a diminished version that someone with power had decided was the appropriate size for public consumption. Just yourself. The full, unbound, entirely realized version of whatever you are. It was, he thought, the best possible starting point. He walked into Dumbledore's office, and Hermione and Neville were already there, and Dumbledore looked at all three of them with the expression of a man who had spent a long career believing he knew how things would go and was finally, genuinely, in the presence of something that exceeded his models. "Right," Harry said. "Let's begin." And they did.